Okay, welcome. We're going to get into the next story now. So let's do it. All right. Story is Io and Jove. So to try to understand this, we've put a lot of paintings, art, geographical information, lots of geology and fun things. We're going to try to see if we can figure out what this story means. First, let's just look at the kids' version of the story so we have a basic idea, because a lot of these stories we're not that familiar with, so we'll go through it real quickly. There we go. So, Jove likes chicks on Earth. This is Zeus. This is the head god. He's causing trouble. We're not used to that in our perspective, right? We think of the Heavenly Father, the great Christian idea of the divine, and when we hear stories about pagans talking about gods that are jealous and cheating and rapey and murderous and conniving and deceptive and deceived and all of this stuff, it just doesn't exactly make sense to us. And I watched a lot of videos online, people trying to explain this story and other stories. And typically there's this thing that isn't ringing true for me, that every time, but we don't know what else to say. So we always say it, which is something like, oh, these Greeks and their silly gods. Maybe the Greek culture was just a really bad culture. And so they gave themselves license to be horrible because their gods were horrible, something like that. That's a criticism that goes back from that dialectic we talked about between philosophy and theology, philosophy and revealed religion, where ancient thinkers, wise men, said, look, the gods can't be like this because that's not good enough. And so they were kind of revising the story from a dialectic, propositional, analytical approach. However, we're trying to step back from that. We're trying to go behind that and before that to the mythopoetic way of thinking, right? Well, there's other dialectics happening. There's the dialectic within each of these mythopoetic approaches between the prophetic and the doctrinaire, right? The invention of new revelation, understanding, God speaking in real time versus these are the things you're supposed to believe, civil war inside of a theological revealed religion approach. Furthermore, there's another dialectic that's revising these stories, which is the mythopoetic tradition revising, stealing, warring with, sophisticating itself in the face of the criticism of the mythopoetic traditions around it and the other stories it's dealing with. So I had a revelation while trying to figure out this story, because I was just like, what is the point of this? It's not terribly nice. The God is basically the bad guy. And I'm just like, how are you organizing a society around something like this? And it was a real puzzle for me, because remember, we're saying that the ancients are their civilization is emerging as they're learning how to orient themselves properly in and getting better at organizing themselves properly. So the revisions of the stories are the progress of their ability to say, who am I in the world? Well, what is the world? The world is my family and my culture and nature and the divine. And how do I relate to all of these things properly? So as the stories are evolving and emerging, they're allowing people to go from poop throwing apes in the woods to cathedral builders. And like we said before, I don't believe in this silly idea that, we did farming and we had a bunch of caloric surplus. And so then we started doing art because we had some spare time. I don't think so. I think these stories were apes dreaming better and better dreams about who they were and how they fit into the world. And then the entire culture is orienting themselves around understanding, misunderstanding, partially understanding these stories. And the stories are so profoundly powerful. Right? This is one of our Jungian keys to approach the story to get the meaning, is to remember that the stories are so profoundly powerful that they had that transformative effect on us as a species. And so it can't be the case that the story is just a stupid story about a dumb God that's nasty and horrible. It just doesn't. You can't get anything meaningful out of it if you read it that way. And then I had a revelation. This is what I realized. Okay, we've got three dialectics happening here between the story we're going to read, and we're going to get into it like we get into a novel, We're going to approach it through the lens of thinking mythopoetically and thinking as best we can like in ancient Greek. But to do that, there's three dialectics happening. There's the one between our story and the Semitic, Hebrew, Egyptian, Indian, other tradition stories, right? And so we're revising and borrowing and warring with and trying to see whose God is better, and all of that stuff is happening. There's the revision between our own philosophical thinkers inside this tradition saying, what a dumb story. The God's not as ethical as I am or as you are. And so maybe our understanding of love should be better. Our understanding of the highest principles should be refined. And maybe we need to revise the story somehow. That's the one we're going to give the least respect to, actually, this time. I see that Elena is back, but she keeps dropping out. I have to remember to add her when she comes back in. I'm sorry that we really have to find the right platform. But for now, let's do this. So that's a dialectic. And then there's what we said, there's three dialectics happening here. So there's the relationship between the different mythopoetic stories. There's the relationship between the mythopoetic and the propositional, analytical, philosophical criticism from within that same culture. And then there's just the story itself is revising, and you're having a dialectic with it because it's changing you. It's helping you to understand your place in the world, and you're remembering what's memorable. And maybe the story is over thousands of years being revised and changed through that process as well. Okay, so here's what I realized. What about the Hebrew tradition? What about the idea that, here's what we're not getting. Here's the revelation I had. Here's why we're not getting the meaning out of these stories that we're supposed to get out of it. We are in a post-modern Christian, not postmodern, but we're in a post-Cartesian Christian world. And so our idea of the greatest God is the thing that's perfect. He's the Heavenly Father, right? So he can't be the source of our problems. But that's not the way Genesis shows our relationship with God. God is clearly causing lots of problems. He's causing lots of problems for Abraham. Okay? He's pushing Abraham into other problems with culture and the world around him so that he can wrestle with those things. But he's also, it's hard to have a proper relationship with the divine. The divine is problematic to Abraham, even more so to Jacob. There's this image of Jacob wrestling with God, right? And trying to dislocate his leg and dislocating his leg in a wrestling match in order to say, I won't let you go until you bless me, right? So there's this element of, submission in Islam and submission in our post-Cartesian Christian idea, where it's like you own all the eternal good, and the whole progress of history is us learning to submit and come in line with you. But the Greek idea is very different, right? So the Greek God isn't the Heavenly Father. He's the divine force that's there, and you need to be aware of him. He has made the world habitable. Right? He's done a lot of good to make it that we're not living in that pre-flood world that we read about in the Metamorphoses. We're living in a world where we can do as well as we're doing right now. But where we are is in a place where we're trying to dance properly or wrestle properly with the divine and with nature and with culture, right? So the stories in the mythopoetic tradition are saying your knowledge of all these things is a relational kind of knowledge, which means what you learn about something other than yourself is at one and the same time knowledge of yourself, and vice versa, right? Because as you get to know your spouse, you get to know yourself, right? Every revelation about the differences between the two of you in your marriage is a revelation both of the other person and of you at the exact same time, whatever that revelation is. And so this story helps us to see that, because the fatherly figure that's good in this story is not the highest deity. All right. And we're going to see that clearly in the poetry. And that's what helped me to realize this, is that, okay, wait a minute. What's the title of the book? The title is Metamorphoses, the concept of the cosmos, right? He's going to explain everything. Everything around us is going to be explained with one word: metamorphosis. Change. things change. New stuff comes out of old stuff, new patterns, new habits, new abilities, new habitable order, new things emerging out of things that are not that thing. So we are not at heaven yet. Right? In our post-Cartesian Christian perspective, heaven's there and we're aiming at it, but the progress we make is through, now this isn't for all Christians. Some Christians have this other more mythopoetic way of discussing it that I'm talking about, and you can see the evidence for it in the scriptures. But largely, our culture, especially our not religiously serious, but still inescapably Christian aspect of our culture, which makes up a large part of our atheistic scientists and all sorts of just, I'm trying to live a good life or have a good time. I vaguely think of myself as culturally Christian or as atheistic or whatever. All of those people are very, 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 very Christian in their perspective, whether they understand it or not. And I'm not trying to pick sides between the differences here, but the type of Christian that they are is this post-Cartesian Christian, which is that heaven has all the answers and we're just trying to get there. Any progress that needs to be made is about the refining of ourselves to come in line with that thing. The Greek perspective is different. The Greek perspective says God and humanity are metamorphosing together. Right? We use the word evolution a lot because the Darwinian paradigm shift was so powerful. But a better word for the processes of the cosmos outside of biology, and probably within it too, is perhaps metamorphosis. And we're going to look at a lot of geology in this because we're going to look at the river gods and how they look. So we're going to start to understand some big metamorphic geological processes that go into understanding this story as well. But metamorphosis is this idea that we're in the middle of a story, but the story is a yin-yang dance between us and the divine, between the infinite and the finite, between the material and the spiritual, between the feminine and the masculine, all right? So whatever the yin and yang is, as it expresses itself on every level of analysis, probably the positive and the negative of charge or something, whatever that thing is, it's this chasing dance of incompatible incomprehensibles that are in love and chasing each other without fully comprehending. So that's the revelation, is that when we try to understand the story and we see, okay, there's some good deities here and there's some good characters and Io is a hero for sure. Why are these stories? This is the second one now where we see the pattern where the nymph, who's basically a feminine archetype of ancient humanity in a sense, right? It's like the great ones of the past. How is it that culture and our relationship with God and nature has evolved so that we have the relationship we have with the feminine now at the time that the story is given, versus what it was like before? So we have to remember the context of the story. First, there's the creation and the chaos and the explosion and things cooling down and coming into an earthly material and all of that chaotic insanity. But then there's this world that was once and is no more, that was destroyed, where everything was sort of warring to establish itself and viciously dominant of everything else. And that world is over. The flood wiped out that level of wickedness. Now we still have elements of malevolence. We have elements of catastrophe, which can be thought of in the mythopoetic way as the malevolence of the personal forces in the world, right? That's another paradigm shift here. It's that typically, if we look at, we've been praising and obviously relying a lot upon Peterson and the way he approached the Genesis stories, but he has these two categories that he stresses a lot of catastrophe and malevolence, right? There's just bad things happen. The earthquake doesn't know you're there, but it happens anyway. And then there's actual people with ill will. But the mythopoetic prophets and the writers of stories like this, they saw personal intention in everything. They didn't personify things. They didn't have a distinction between I and it. It was always an I and thou, which is what we talked about before. So it's almost like the malevolence of nature or the malevolence of God, the capriciousness, the character traits that make things difficult for us that are coming from those other aspects. So God can be malevolent. He can be selfish. He can be not fully evolved to what he needs to be, But what gets him to where he needs to be is his relationship with us. And what gets us to where we need to be is our relationship with him, right? So it's very much, it's basically like you say this. You say, okay, my marriage isn't perfect, but I'm only 10 years in, right? That's the way the Greeks are thinking about their relationship with Zeus. He's on the throne. He understands the proper place of all the other divine forces. And so there's an order that's habitable, that's not that ancient domination, horrible, unlivable place. However, it's not as good as it could be. There's still a heaven we're going to, but our progress there is not simply, and again, I don't think the Christians make it have to be this, but the post-Cartesian general Christian understanding that we have is, because the Hebrewic texts, they have wrestling with God, right? They have Abraham negotiating with God. And so there are elements of that in the text, but we don't comprehend that, right? If a modern Christian pastor preaches about Abraham negotiating with God, it's sort of like they try to explain it away. Like, well, God kind of knew what he was going to do anyway. And he was just sort of playing with Abraham like a puppet to say, oh, I'll be like, I'm talking to a little kid and we'll pretend to negotiate, but really I know where this ends. But that's not the way the text and the narrative presents itself. The way it's presented, if we want to just accept it that way, is it's talking to us as if things aren't perfect yet. And so one of the things that's amazing about this revelation I had while trying to comprehend this story is it respects our dignity, right? It's very much saying, okay, you're in a tough spot, right? The ancient Hebrew scriptures, the Greek, the Egyptian mythology, the Mesopotamian, these stories, the stories that come from these cultures, one of the reasons why it's not proper to think that you can get through life without them is that they're the only stories that really respect your dignity right down to the bottom. They say, this is how bad it is. This is how bad it is to be on earth. This is how bad it is to have to relate to God. This is how bad it is to be tortured by your culture. This is how bad it is to live with social injustice. This is how bad it is to be Job, who's the greatest relational thing to the divine possible. And, it's not really about Job, and God might just decide to start fucking with you, right? Like, these stories respect our dignity by saying, I'm not going to give you a simple morality tale. I don't want to slag off Disney because we're going to talk about a Disney story in this, and Disney is very much in touch with the archetypes, especially with their older movies. But, we'll use the phrase Disney, and when I use it, I just mean like, cartoon, la-di-da. It doesn't really apply to Disney, so I really should stop doing that. But it's not a childish story where it says, okay, just do X and Y, and then you get what you need. Life isn't a simple video game, and these stories are the cheat codes. It's luckily and happily and joyfully, and we should be pleased at the fact that it is much more complicated than that. The seriousness of life is deep enough that our dignity is respected by it, that the tragedy of human life is profound and meaningful. So, in any case, all of that to say that one of the great things about understanding that this story is our relation to the divine, and that the divine itself is relating to us, and that we're both evolving through this process or metamorphosing, is that, remember, we're at a place where things are way better than they were before, and it's because of Zeus. But that doesn't mean that we're in heaven. We have progress to make still. There's still more progress to be made. Hey, Roger, am I still coming through, or is the audio not working?
Yeah, you're coming through. The audio is perfect.
Okay, thank you, because people were getting kicked off and coming back. I wasn't sure. Okay, great. Thank you. So one of the great things about this, because again, I was just banging my head against, like, what am I supposed to make of this story? Zeus is an asshole and some things change. Like, what's the point? But then when I realized, no, this is a wrestling with God story. This isn't God is right. This is how is the cosmos, which is made up of the relational the characterological relationships between humanity and, the Apollonian, the Dionysian, and the Hadesian, right? So like the material and the infinite spiritual and the human, which exists as the mean between those. How are these things relating to each other? And that relationship evolves over time. And the whole point of the story of the Metamorphosis is that evolution. So we start with utter chaos. We explode into too much energy for anything to be. We cool down, different levels of deities and giants come in. All of that ancient world is wiped out, and the proper God takes the throne. Zeus, who says, look, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get to that heaven, but we're gonna get there through this evolutionary process, which, again, I really think metamorphosis might be a better word for it. So in any case, this metamorphic process. So with that in mind, let's get into the basic version of the story first, and then we're going to look at the more scriptural, serious adult version. So Jove is into chicks on Earth. His wife Hera isn't cool with it, right? So we got Zeus. His eye is always straying. He's passionately into the things that are coming into being and that can exist in the realm that he's made possible. It's like the Sultan is looking at the daughters of the nobles. It's like a Scheherazade type of issue. All right. His wife's not cool with it, right? So she's super jealous. So these are the two big gods. These are the two big ones. This is the next generation of the version that we are living in still today of, hey, how about this for making it work out? And Zeus is the guy, and he's on the throne for a reason, and his wife. But they've got a messed up marriage. In other words, that's another hint that there's still some development that's ongoing here. We're not in heaven just because Zeus is on the throne. There's some things that need to change, and those things that need to change are not just us submitting to the divine principle that's infinitely perfect eternally. It's us and God evolving together. If it's all relational, he's not fully what he needs to be until we go through some battles and some experiences and some fights and some development. Every now and then I'll post questions here. Okay, cool. So this is something. Now, it's quite pathetic, right? Here's the cool thing. It's like, okay, here's our highest God. He's got a bad marriage because he doesn't know how to maintain a good marriage. His entire life is tormented by the fact that he's always like a coward watching over his shoulder. Oh, is my wife coming in the room? I mean, he's a very comical character. It's like my Uncle Napoleon in a lot of ways. It's just sort of, it's very funny. All right. So his eye is caught by this one nymph. Now she's the daughter of Inachus, who is one of the river gods of ancient Egypt or ancient Greece, under the command of Peneus. So we have to remember the context of this story because the stories are communicating with each other too. So Peneus has a daughter, Daphne. What a hero, right? She's a Christ-like hero. She's a world-changing hero, and we just finished her story. Again, the pattern is repeating. The god, Apollo, is kind of up there as far as gods go. Nymphs, they're living a very human type of life for divine creatures. They're more like founding fathers, right? It's like this. In other words, the story is saying, hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is what life was like for maidens 1,000 years ago, right? The metamorphosis, the world is changing here, but these were the struggles we had to come up against to figure out the solutions and the answers to those. And so the cosmos is changing, God is changing, we are changing, nature is changing, all because we're in relationship and that relationship is evolving. But if we go back to the founding stories, here's a nymph. She's the daughter of this big river. That river's been here a long time. We're going to talk about the geology, and I can't wait to talk about it. It's more interesting than it sounds. Now, so you see, we can start to unlock the keys of what this means. So Inachus is a river, and we're going to look at that river. It's a big and important and flowing and powerful river. In other words, it's the paternalistic good father. All right. The whole story starts with the mist of the fast rushing, powerful, flowing river Inachus that makes a foggy mist of rage and strength to protect a beautiful valley forest, which we're going to look at all of the geology of all of this. We really are. It's going to be amazing. But in other words, we were just told about Zeus. He's not the heavenly father type. He has to learn some lessons to become more like that. And the way he's learning those lessons are through the archetypal, ancestral, good guy father, right? So you can imagine a bunch of you can imagine 100,000 years of not such good people, and then a few really wise and really good ones who start to establish, right? It's again, look at Genesis. It's like, here's a whole bunch of slavery and tyranny and kingdoms and mess. But hey, put the spotlight on Joseph. Put the spotlight on Jacob. Boy, he's kind of deceptive and he's got a lot of karma coming his way, but he wrestles with God properly. Oh, Joseph, put the spotlight on these different ways of being. You could be like Cain. That's like those giants that got wiped out before the flood, right? So it's put the spotlight on ways of being in the world. And the stories are, again, they're characterological. It's the vocabulary of narrative. So they're saying, here's a way that you might be able to be in the world. Now, you don't reduce that to propositions and then take it as a lesson to say, oh, I'll try to be like this. You can do that. And if you were to try to do that, you'd be in the realm of philosophy, and you need to, go to the philosophers and work out your ethics and come up with your propositions. But before all of that, without having to do all of that, because not everybody can do the thinking, it's just not available to most of us, you can immediately relate to a character that's presented to you. You can read a story and get to know the hero or the anti-hero or the sometimes good, sometimes bad guy, which we said all of these characters are a yin and a yang. They're good here, but not good there. They're good for this other thing, but not for this other thing, right? So it's all about them finding their proper place, all right? So we said before, the mythopoetics thought of knowledge of the self and knowledge of the world around you as one and the same thing. So finding the proper place for everything is the same thing as being properly ordered within yourself. Okay, the story maps onto you. You understanding how to navigate the world is you mapping the world onto your body, basically. Now, let me explain what I mean by that just a little bit. A lot of you will know what I'm referring to, but one of the things I'm talking about is that you're navigating the world is you using models that are generated, we think of them as generated in the mind, but really there's no difference between the mind and the body. The mind is spread out across the body. It's really one thing in some ways. It's not in others, but it's in some ways it's one thing. So here's a story from psychology. Peterson talks about this. When you look at an object, you don't see an object. You don't see an object. You infer object, you conclude object, you derive object, but the first thing you see is a tool or an obstacle, or you're completely blind to it. Okay? What that means is the way you're oriented in the world, what you're aiming at, determines what you register as something that's stopping you from getting to what you aim at, something that can assist you in getting to what you're aiming at, or you're just blind to it. And 99.999% of the things in the world you're completely blind to. And thank God for that, because you wouldn't be able to live otherwise. If you were seeing too many, if you're seeing too many patterns, but you could just be frozen still if you tried to observe the things around you. They're infinite. They're infinite in every direction. Was that Dyson who said that? Some scientist said that. It's a really great saying, because you can just zoom in, he said, forever into one eventual atom and proton and subatomic particle. You could just go in forever. It's infinite in that direction, not just infinite that way and infinite this way. It's infinite on whatever you want to focus on. So, you can look and say, okay, how many If I simplified my room, how many pixels of every color are available to me when I look in any direction, just sitting right here? Okay, how many particles of matter? Okay, let's even zoom up. How many objects are in my room and how can they all be related to each other? Combinatorics means the simplest number of things around me can explode into infinite complexity at any moment. So, what is living life? What makes life livable is not taking everything into account. It's taking a billion things and reducing them to the things that matter. That's what the story's trying to do for us. It's saying, focus on this. These are the things that you need to be thinking about in order to go from point A to point B. That's the narrative. The narrative language is you're here and you need to get there, and things happen as you're going that help you or stop you or slow you down on your journey. That's right. So that's the language we're using. Now, this story isn't just a good novel. It's not just an epic novel. It's not just like an archetypal novel. It's mythology, right? It's like the meta. It's if you want a story about how to get from point A to point B, we're talking about how to get from nothingness to infinite cosmic change and metamorphosis to eventual paradise. And we're in the middle. Okay. Now, with that way of approaching the story, it doesn't bother us so much that Zeus has some growing to do. I mean, right in the story, there's a better version of paternity. The river god is a better father than Zeus. Okay, so people in the post-Cartesian Christian perspective, they hear Zeus and they think, oh, that was their word for Jehovah or Yahweh or the Heavenly Father that's all perfect already. No, it wasn't. That's not how they understood it. They didn't think of it that way. They thought, oh, Zeus, yes, I hope he doesn't strike me with lightning. He's properly on the throne. But when I think of a king on the throne, I think of someone who could order my head chopped off. I think of someone who could bless me with great lands or whatever, right? So he's not good. He's not bad. He's there and he's dangerous. And you need to know who he is and you need to be in proper relationship with him. But he can evolve too. He can metamorphose too, characterologically. So otherwise, the story just doesn't make sense. And I've looked at it and beaten my head against it for so long. And when I went to this story to try to prepare for this lecture, I was doing it again. I was like, I don't get this story. Like the Apollo Daphne one just seems so profound. And again, when I started with that one, I thought, I just don't get this story. But by wrestling with it and suddenly it unlocks. The Apollo Daphne one is just a tsunami of the most profound meaning. You can think about it every day and live a better life. And then I come to Io and Jove and I think, what the hell is the purpose of this? I mean, it seems so random. Somebody gets turned into a cow. Somebody gets their eyes, they're dead. It makes the peacock eyes, big freaking deal. What's the point? Like, Zeus is an asshole date rapist and his wife is a jealous shrew and he's a coward who's afraid of her. And it's like, what a wonderfully uplifting story, right? It's like saying, at first it seems like, go to your meth head, toothless neighbor and look at their marriage. It's like, I don't want to look at that. Like, how is this giving me wisdom for understanding the world? It's like, well, I know I must be reading the story wrong if that's the way it's hitting me. I haven't yet the ears to hear it. I haven't been able to unlock it. So I say, all right, let's find these Jungian keys. Let's look for the mythopoetic way of thinking. Let's try to find the approach that unlocks the meaning. Because I know for sure with Apollo and Daphne, it had profound meaning. It predicted extremely clearly and explicitly. It predicted thousands of years ago the conditions under which nuclear fire would enter the world. And it said it explicitly. Okay. That story is way too profound to be one paragraph before a story that makes no sense. So I said, all right, let's start wrestling with it. And part of what helped me to understand it is all of the time I'm not understanding it. And there's so many stories or versions of retelling this story that we've been doing for a long time in our blind post-Cartesian. I'm not slagging Descartes, we just finished a big philosophy course. We spent a lot of time looking at Descartes as a highly significant thinker. So I'm not trying to shit on him there. But what I'm saying is what we're doing right now is trying to get the wisdom of the mythopoetic. And one of the things that's stopping us is it's a different language. It's a different way of thinking. And we, in our post-Cartesian Christian world, think of the Heavenly Father as having to be perfect. And so it doesn't make sense to us. That's not the title of the book. The title of the book is Metamorphoses. All things are growing. All things are changing. And what they change into out of what they came means newness comes into the world. And that newness is on this arc of betterness, right? It went from impossible to even be to impossible to be solid to impossible to be good to good, right? We've been watching in a very short time this progression, and it's good now because we have Zeus and he's working out what he needs to work out. All right. He's in charge, and we can do a little dance and a song because, okay, the right principle is in charge. Now, how is it going to work itself out with everything? Well, it can't know that until certain human characters come along, right? You can't have all the answers if the answers are how do each of these things relate to each other in every possible circumstance? How do each of these characters relate until all the characters have been on the stage? And so we're just at the very beginning still. We're basically in the chapters between 11 and the rest of Genesis as far as how back the mythopoetry goes, right? We did the first 11 chapters, flood and destruction and recreation and all of that stuff in the first few bits of the Metamorphoses. But now with Apollo and Daphne, and now with Io and Jove, we're into that sort of, we're in history now. This is more Abrahamic. You can see the human personalities are clearly emerging in these lesser deities, and the applicability to us is obviously more applicable to us now because we're in the world where we live in now, right? All of those other metamorphoses have changed, and now we're talking about the world we're in now. I'm going to add everybody that comes into stream in case they want to talk. So I'm just going to add you there, and you can, remove or whatever. Okay, so that was profound. That was profound to me. And to sum it up, what takes us from not being able to comprehend a story like this, and I'm telling you, every time I tried to understand it, all the YouTube videos, the BBC broadcasts, every time the story is retold, we're doing it in this post-Cartesian Christian perspective where God is the Heavenly Father. He's already perfect, and the progress we make towards heaven is through greater submission and alignment to him. That's not metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is the nature of all being is continual change, and relationship between characterological truths is the basic ingredient of that change. So God evolves as we evolve because our metamorphoses, it's a better word than evolution, really, but what we would normally think of as evolution, our evolution is dependent upon the different characterological smashes of different types of humanity. So ways of being, Jacob, Joseph, Isaac, right? These are ways of being in the world. Cain, Apollo is a way of being in the world. Daphne is a way of being in the world. And now we're going to be introduced to the second hero, who again is from the human side of things and is feminine. Okay, this is the second type of human hero that's basically, okay, go back 1,000 years in our culture. These are the archetypes. These are the mythological great-great-great-grandparents. Life used to be like this, and it used to be difficult in this way, but this type of hero, who happens to be feminine twice in a row now, emerged. And how she wrestled with or interacted with or manifested her being, it evolved her and the deity at the same time, right? So we're living in this world where Zeus, thank God he's on the throne. He understands how to make the proper order. We're not living in the chaos of the giants and vicious tyranny and domination. And we're not living in any of those previous places. He's risen to the throne. But like our perspective now, we're not there yet. We're not at heaven. There's an evolution happening, and that evolution happens with the characterological developments of all the characters. That's what Ovid is saying the cosmos is. The cosmos, everything around you, is the development of these characterological relational. The development is terminologically, the characterological development, the relational development, that is how newness comes into the world. That's metamorphosis. Okay. So I'm done repeating on that, but it's thinking in the mythopoetic way we talked about, where knowledge of self is knowledge of the world and vice versa. Knowledge of the world becomes knowledge of the self because it's an I-thou relationship instead of an I-it relationship. So it's like, I get to know my friend better. Well, how I do that is simultaneously understanding what's different between the two of us and getting to know myself. The knowledge of both characters develops together. So with that in mind, let's see if we can see the story. So first we'll do the kids version. Jove is really into chicks on Earth, right? These nymphs. Hera's not cool with it. She's super jealous and insecure. Jove is this womanizing Lothario who's also very cowardly and afraid of his wife. It's comical. It's absolutely comical. And then the story begins by telling us here's where this story begins, in a valley with a raging river, and the steam and the mist is over that valley. And there's this beautiful, like, enchanted forest. And we're going to look at it because it's all real locations. So we're going to look at Google Earth, and I've got some GIS stuff. We've downloaded it. But what that is the paternal brooks of Io, of Daphne, right? Daphne's father is Phineus, the king of the river gods. Well, now we're looking at Io. She's another nymph whose father is a river god, Inachus. And he has provided proper fatherly perspective, environment, right? Zeus is not the guy to look for. That's the revelation. Zeus isn't the heavenly father. The heavenly father principle will be developed in Zeus as he relates with it, as he comes to understand things not working out, right? Because that thing is making itself felt. But it's coming from Zeus and from us. It's our dance together that is this progress. So the good father is Inachus. And it's very sad how the story starts. He's wondering what's happened to his abducted daughter, or is she dead somewhere? In any case, the rage of the river god is the origin of the story, coming from the mountain. We're going to look at all of that. Loud spray from paternal origin overshadows the story. That's what I'm talking about. Now, Jove likes his daughter, hangs out with her along the banks of the stream, and he woos her, and they have a relationship. This is the kids' version. So walking with her as he was disguised as a shepherd. So he pretended to look like a shepherd, and then they spend time together. And Hera's quite jealous. She notices he's not around Mount Olympus. He's not around the court. Where is he? She notices, he's been gone for a while. He told me he was going to go pick up something at the store. Here he is. So it's 3 a.m. Where's Zeus, right? So she's having a hell of a miserable time. He's a piece of shit for a spouse, obviously, right? He's tormenting her with his way of being. But that's how being is at this point, we're told, right? This isn't where we are now, but it is the same epoch that we're in. And this is just how these things are developing. They're about change. The story would be boring if it just said everything was perfect and here we are. That wouldn't speak to us. So this is how they're understanding it. So he's into this girl. They make a relationship. Hera is jealous. She notices he's gone for way too long, goes out to fix things up and set it right. Jove is with Io. So Zeus and Io are hanging out. Hera shows up. So in order to hide his sins, in order to be like, oh, I don't want her to be angry at me, he quickly changed, because Zeus knows everything. So he knows she's coming, right? Of course he does, right? Even if you're cheating, your wife knows you're cheating. Maybe she doesn't want to believe it, depending on how committed she is to self-delusion, but she knows, and it's causing tension in the marriage. You're not keeping that a secret, even if she doesn't explicitly know it or say it out loud. And it's causing tension and problems. And you know she knows. You know you're a piece of shit. You know you're making things uncomfortable and unhappy and broken apart in your familial life. And you're kind of just trying to minimize that because you're being driven by your dick or whatever. So this is Jove. He's this comical. He's this ridiculous a character. So Zeus is there with Io. They're making love, and he knows Hera's coming. So poof, he just quickly turns her into this sleek, sexy, healthy-looking young heifer. He turns her into a cow. And Hera shows up and goes, hey, baby, I'm just hanging out in the woods, check it out. Oh, look at this beautiful cow I found. And boy, isn't it nice around here? He's just sort of like trying to pull one over on her. And also plausible deniability. Maybe he's hoping that she's not that upset, and maybe she knows, but she'll pretend not to know, and he can get away with having his fun. I mean, you can see exactly his character come out and her character come out. She's like this, she's got like a frying pan, and she's like, I told you. And she's, you know what I mean? It's as comical as can be. And when we first read it, we're like, this is the God I'm supposed to be revering and respecting. It's like, no, stop. If you live in a kingdom and there's a wise king who's keeping the kingdom secure, you should be happy he's there. Does he get everything right? No. Does he have problems? Yes. That's a better way of speaking to us than to say, you're under the shadow of an all perfect thing. Now, I shouldn't say it's better. I'm not picking sides between the Semitic, the Judeo-Christian, and the pagan perspectives. I'm saying we want to understand this story, so let's understand how they would understand it and get meaning out of it. Now, in other words, I'm saying I may believe personally, I'm not saying I do, I may believe personally that these stories did a great job of giving us a lot of wisdom, but the Christian ones revised it and got us to even further truths. Or I may personally believe, the Christians had it just like this and they were right, but then they went off on some tangent that's wrong, and hopefully there will be a reascendancy of paganism because I think they got it more correct. I'm not saying I believe either of those. The class should have that as an open discussion. Anybody should be able to come from either of those perspectives, or from the perspective that they're both completely ridiculous, or they're totally meaningless, or they're both exactly the same and totally profound, or whatever perspective you want. What we're doing in the class is saying, well, let's get into the right mindset to get whatever wisdom could be gotten out of these stories. And what we find is that it's profound. It's a tsunami of meaning. It overwhelms you, but only if you approach it that way. So that's all I'm trying to say when I say it's a better way. Let's imagine it's a better way and say, well, at least that's pretty respectful. God can repent. God can make mistakes. God is not perfect, right? We're not the puppets of a system that's already perfect. And if only we were in line, that would be all the progress that can be made. No, there's wrestling to be done. There's trying to dislocate God's leg to get a blessing. There's negotiating with the divine. All of that is in the Christian perspective too. And I feel like in our post-Cartesian understanding of Christianity, we've lost that. And that's why we don't understand those aspects of Genesis and why we don't understand these stories. So let's give that up. Let's try to go back to the mythopoetic and say, okay, the king, I can swear allegiance to the king and be thrilled that he's on the throne because, hey, we're not burning in hell anymore. The giant cyclopses aren't wiping everything out with dominant power. There's a balance and a marriage, and things are basically working, but they're not yet perfect. So let's push them forward through every generation. And that's what these stories are like. It's like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph are generational, pushing the kingdom of God further one more generation. That's their stories. That it's like things, Abraham did what God required, and you're now here, Isaac. Now it's your turn. Hey, Jacob, Isaac got us here. You got a lot of problems, buddy. You got a deceptive mother, and you're kind of intellectual and deceptive, and you're listening to her whispering, and you're causing all these problems. You're going to have to wrestle with the cosmos and wrestle with culture and have a lot of karma and come back and wrestle with God himself in order to get a blessing. But your job is to push it forward one more generation. You don't criticize the past. The past got you here. Now it's got to be made a little bit better. Okay, now you've made it better. Now you go ahead and screw up Joseph's life and, make him a tattletale and make him sold into slavery by his brothers and sow discord and dissent between all of them. Fine. We're not criticizing you. You did what you needed to do to push it one generation forward. Now it's Joseph's turn to go and push it again and save the world. Okay. Just like that progress of moving towards the kingdom through better examples of ways of being, Daphne shows up. Well, first Apollo shows up. He slays the python. Then Daphne shows up and is like, yo, you're not the cat's tits, Apollo. You're not right in every situation. You don't get to make certain demands. So she's a hero that emerges. And again, she's a nymph. She's like a meta feminine character from 1,000 years ago. It's like the founding fathers of how womanhood and masculinity is evolving to understand their relationship to each other and their relationship to the cosmos and to the divine. So this human, very human-like figure, sort of a meta-human, right? It's not quite on the Apollo divine level, but it has the ability to bring Apollo low, right? It has the ability to be the tool of Cupid, the higher principle, to say, yo, God, you're not right in that way right here, and fuck you for thinking you are. Like, that's the story, and it's amazing, but it changes our relationship. You know, another way to think about it is the evolving relationship between powers, governmental powers, split up powers, right? Constitutional interpretations from the Supreme Court. It's like we have a history here. And I'll give an example. So there's a really great Supreme Court decision that was decided by Scalia, look, we're going to do a course on liberty and the Constitution, which is why I'm thinking about this for one reason. But of all the interpretive methods of the Constitution, there's textualism and originalism and original intent and pragmatism. There's all these different ways of saying, well, how should we understand what the right way to decide this case is? Well, Scalia was a great advocate of a thing called textualism, which he called originalism, but it's not like original intent, which is more like a right-leaning pragmatism or something. Let's not get into that. That's too simplistic a version. But in any case, he's saying, look, the text is what we agreed on. Let's understand how it would have been understood originally when it was written. And if that can settle the question, that's what we're going to start with. Then maybe we'll look at other things if we have to. Well, one of the times he had a decision, it was really quite, he wrote the majority opinion on this. Most of the justices signed with him and said, yeah, that's the right answer. Well, he said, okay, the text isn't exactly clear on this, but it points to what would give us the evidence. And here's what he said. He said, the Second Amendment right to own and bear arms in America is a right for private citizens to have guns. It's not if you're in the army. And he said, here's how I can tell you that's the case. I looked into it really carefully. He did a lot of language analysis and all the people with their arguments. He waded through it. But he said, look, the text of the Second Amendment says the right of the people to own and bear arms shall not be infringed, which is an interesting phraseology, he said. It's almost as if that right already existed in their understanding, that they knew what that right was, and that the new government can't infringe upon that. So he looked into it historically. He says, oh, look, Western European culture understood that they had a right to own and bear arms. Here's where that right came from. Catholic kings, Protestant kings. I'm not going to go into the whole history. The point is, one king comes to power. He decides these Protestants, they shouldn't have their guns anymore because I'm kind of afraid they're going to oppose me. So the troops come through and take everybody's guns away. Well, king's not in power anymore. There's a new king. So all of the Protestants get together and they petition. They send a letter to the king and they say, listen, we'd like it in writing that we have a right to own weapons and that nobody can take that right away from us. Do you think you could give that to us? So like hundreds of years ago, and the king said, yeah, that's obviously correct. Nobody can come through and just take your guns for no reason. So he wrote it. And so they understood that they had a right to have guns and that that's something that the power forces can't just take away without due process. He says that was the European, the British common law understanding of the colonists when they formed a new government. And so what they said was, yeah, that right that you know you have, we're not going to infringe upon that right. Now, why do I bring this up? I bring it all up really to get to that story of petitioning the king. There's this relationship between people who are being ruled and the power forces and saying, look, put it in writing for me, would you? And no, I won't. Or I'm coming through with my troops. Or yes, absolutely, that should be in writing. We're going to be bound to this so that there's some stability here. That's that give and take dance between things is how this story is. It's basically giving us the common law history of our relationship to the divine, right? Is that, am I being coherent here? Or is that making sense? When Apollo and Daphne are fighting over something, right? And Apollo is brought to his knees, there's this historic precedent that's been established that, okay, that's not how we move forward. Psychologically, individually, we must use Apollo to slay our demons. We must use the bravery of facing chaotic forces and dragons and kill them so we can get the power of that. We should invent medicine. We should do all these things. That's what Apollo is telling us about how we move forward as a people on a planet. But when that same principle of cutting things into pieces and making them into a game looks at other humans and love and thinks, oh, I'll do X, Y, and Z, and then I can demand to be loved because I earned the points, and I'll force myself upon you because I know what's right. The story of Daphne says, think that way all you want. It'll take about 2 minutes before you are laid low, and that's not the way forward. Human dignity requires that this not be just a game and we're pawns in it. Okay. And if you don't learn that lesson, you're going to destroy everything in a totalitarian fashion. But if you do, like Apollo, who learns it and learns to hold back the reins, he's always restraining himself. He's always pulling himself back and saying, wait a minute, what I can offer is there to serve a bigger thing. Let's put laurel wreaths around everything to remind myself constantly of that. He learns his lesson. But how does he learn his lesson? Because Daphne, a feminine, more human type character than Apollo, says, I'll lose my life to tell you to go fuck yourself. And she says it to a thing that is bringing goodness into the world, that is divine. So now that we've seen that pattern established and all of this ranting I'm doing, I'm hoping that for me, that unlocks the key. For me, that made me go, I spent hours yesterday even looking at the story going, I can't make sense of this story. What's the point? Until I had that revelation. When you understand that they're not telling you the God is here, go be like him. They're saying you are like him. You're like all these different deities, and they're not, they got to be in the proper order for you to be integrated. The right principle has to be on the throne, but there's a relationship between you and the divine and nature, you and culture and nature, culture and the divine. Those relationships have to develop, and they're not right when this one's tyrannizing this one in this way. They're not right when this one goes too far in this area, right? That's what we're learning. So with that, and I'm going to stop repeating it now, but that really is, I think, the important way of unlocking this. We can now look at a ridiculous figure of the king god, the god king. I mean, the Zeus is fucking ridiculous. He's like, oh, my wife with her frying pan and her rolling pin, and oh, but I can't help. Oh, look at how pretty these girls are. That's Zeus. Fuck. Okay, well, think about it. 10,000, 100,000 years ago, humanity is building culture out of what we could have been, which is just animals beating each other with rocks. It makes sense that this would be one of the first things on our agenda to get right. The relationship between, horniness, which is necessary to reproduce. I mean, if you don't have culture, you definitely need horniness because you're going to die before you're 25. So let's get these creatures reproducing as quickly as possible. We're the descendants of that, but it's metamorphosed. We're in a new world. We're in a world where Zeus is on the throne, and there's something better about the order. We're not living in trees and throwing poop at each other. We're developing culture. So one of the things we're going to have to get right is, what do you do with the horniness issue? And it's brought to us as a thing that to be dealt with, where, I mean, Zeus doesn't do well in this, right? Apollo isn't the hero of the Daphne story. He's pathetic. I mean, he goes from awesome down to begging for some human warmth and being denied. I mean, he goes through simping and MGTOWing. I mean, he goes through every type of pathetic masculine approach to the feminine possible and is just reduced. But he's the god. Well, the story's saying there's some things that need to be reduced. There's some enlightenment that needs to happen, right? There's some opening of your eyes to recognize what this thing is for that can put you on a higher enlightenment level where you would not act like a fool. Okay, I see your message. Thank you. All right, so that's the setup. Let's go. Let's finish the children's version. So Hera knew the truth, obviously. I mean, obviously. She's out there with a frying pan looking for Zeus. Oh, you're hanging out with a cow in the woods, are you? Uh-huh, yeah, right? She's also, because she's not being deceptive, or maybe because there's a feminine wisdom that's just always superior in this way to the masculine wisdom, of course she knows the truth, and of course he's a pathetic, whiny little liar who's like, I'm just hanging in the woods. What's up? And it's like, you can see her rolling her eyes in contempt, right? This isn't good. There's a marriage issue that needs to be developed here. But so it's like, okay, yeah, sure. You're hanging in the woods with a heifer, huh? Yeah, I'm sure you are. So instantly she knows what's going on. She goes up and she pretends very cleverly, and this is very phallic. It's very feminine. It's very cat-like. It's how we know feminine character to be able to be, right? So she sees the lying little son of a wimpy bitch, and she goes, oh, what a beautiful cow. Oh my gosh, I've never seen such a pretty cow. What a beautiful heifer. Oh, Zeus, you own all of everything. Would you give to me this heifer? It's such a small thing. Why wouldn't you give it to me as a gift? Oh, great love of my life. Okay, so she's torturing him because he's a liar and he deserves it. And he can't refuse to give it to her without explaining why he's not giving her the cow, which is, so what does she want? She wants him to say, look, it's not really a cow. I was doing this and you gotta, and then hit me in the head and then we'll go home and you pull me by the ear. I mean, he's really comical. Or he won't even confess. He won't be honest. He won't be real with her. So, well, the rage of Hera is coming to the cow. Sorry. I mean, Io is completely innocent in all of this. She's deceived by Jove, Zeus. She's deceived. She's beautiful. She's intelligent. She ends the story quite well, by the way. She's clearly got a great character. It's another daughter of the river gods, another meta-human feminine character hero from our ancient past saying, okay, there's some masculine divine forces here that need to be pushed back against, and those forces are causing a hell to be the world in which our great ancient mothers had to live. And they fought through that, and the record of their fighting through that is the story. And the story is saying, okay, you're here now. You're not there. This is what's already happened. So wake up and you're here. You don't get to be foolish in that way anymore, because of course that's how it used to be. But these things happened. And so now we're here. Okay, so let's see what happens. So of course Zeus has to give her the cow, because he's not going to say the truth because he's afraid of his wife, even though he's the king. It's very funny, right? I mean, one of the ways of misunderstanding this is like it's misogynistic and anti-feminine. It's like the feminist way of understanding things is to understand everything that way. And it's always such a stupid way of understanding things. Look at how pathetic Apollo it becomes. Look at how pathetic Zeus is from the start of the story. The king of everything has a relationship with a woman, his wife. He might be king of everything, but he's not king of her. He's afraid of her. He's like, I couldn't help myself. Don't make me confess. Let me hide what's going on here. I mean, he's pathetic. Okay, so that is, masculinity dominating and making women, they're not anything but robots. It's like, well, both are true, right? To the story, I mean. In the story, I mean, we're going to read the adult version in a second, but Zeus rapes her. I mean, he date rapes her. Apollo tries to rape Daphne, and he learns that he gets kicked in the balls properly and whatever. But Zeus is essentially date raping Io. He's lying to her about who he is, and she's not really that interested. Maybe we'll see when we get to the adult version. But he's pathetic in every possible way. Well, in every possible way that's relevant to the story. So Hera leads Io away. Oh, thank you, honey. I love this cow. She gets away with it. Tells her how much contempt she has for her. Now, this is unfair to Io also, right? There's this matriarchy that's also unfair to womanhood and young womanhood's trying to establish itself in the world. It's like the structures aren't right yet, and you've got men who are strong enough to impose themselves, and the story's telling us how to get to a place where that's not happening so often, right? What's the right way to oppose that? And, our ancient mothers had to figure that out. This is the record of that. But then there's also some matriarchy that's pretty fucking harsh too. And you can see that if you look in like, Western Christian types like to criticize Islamic cultures a lot for being very misogynistic or whatever. They just, women in bags and all this stuff. One of the assumptions they have is that, men are dominating women, but women are always the mainstays of the religious systems that seem to be oppressing. If you interpret it as them being oppressed, I'm not saying they're not being oppressed, by the way. I'm using this language of seems, not because I don't agree that those things are wrong. It's because I'm not trying to make that point. I'm trying to get into the perspective of the culture and how it's working, or dysfunctional. And so the dysfunction I want to point out is not the big obvious one that everybody points out, like, oh, wow, you're cutting clits off and you're, enslaving all your women and stuff. The ISIS approach to femininity is a phytonic approach. It's not even Apollonian, right? It's worse than that. But the thing for us to notice is that what enforces that is the grandmother. Grandmother had a hard time, and she's not going to let the new 7-year-old granddaughter get away with not having a hard time. And the men aren't even that obsessed with enforcing it. If you read Ayaan Hirsi Ali's story of growing up in Somalia, it'll give you a picture of that, and you'll see that emerge out of that story quite vividly and saliently, is that, nasty nuns with rulers can offer a lot of pressure to young femininity trying to figure out how to be proper in the world, as well as some lustful, tyrannical man can. Both. We're not excusing either. We're saying both are bad. So in any case, we see a picture of that. So Hera is leading. I know what you've been up to. What has she been up to? She's just been this beautiful nymph in the wood, very kind and very wise and very sweet, and everybody loves her. She's this awesome girl. And Zeus is lying to her and fooling her and cajoling her and bribing her and changing the weather so that she gets afraid to run away from him. And it's a lot of like it's a little date rapey. It's, I don't think that the Baby It's Cold Outside song is date rapey. I think there's also a dance between masculinity and femininity that gets right. But if you go just a little further than that, what Zeus is doing is very date rapey, and we'll read about that. But what happens? Io gets the punishment for it, right? So I think it's pretty clear at this point that the story isn't telling us be like Zeus and be like Hera. They are the eternal principles of goodness. And, that's not what the story is saying. It's saying, here's some badness in the world. Where's it coming from? It's coming from the divine. That's our post-Cartesian Christian perspective that we fail to see. If we can see that, this story is going to make sense. So I know what you've been up to, you little hussy, you little slut. And she starts, scolding and maybe beating the poor little cow. She gives her to Argus, who is one of her favorite servants. He has 100 eyes. We're going to look at some paintings. Argus has 100 eyes. And he sleeps, but a couple eyes closed. He always has most of them open. He never closes 51 of them. There's always at least half of them open at all times. So she gives the baby cow to Argus to watch. Well, let's pause. We had a story about a lot of eyes before. Marduk has eyes all around his head. He's the archetype that Apollo is participating with, right? He's looking at the dragon Python and slaying him. That's what Marduk is doing, creating a world where we can live. At least we can live in this world, right? I mean, think about it like we're a bunch of apes trying to find a way to live. We've become aware of catastrophes and weather and neighboring tribes and animals and predation and all of this stuff. It's like what you need is a masculine principle to get rid of some of the terrible dragons that would eat your babies, okay? Apollo shows up and does that first. What happens after that? Well, he thinks I own everything now. I made it all work, so you got to fuck me if I want you to. And then Daphne shows up immediately in the story. After one paragraph, Daphne shows up to say, let the feminine speak back to that a little bit. Thank you. Maybe a lot of us say thank you for slaying the dragon. That was quite useful. You don't get to demand a lot from that. All right. We needed to do that. And it's great that you did it. And a lot of people are thrilled with it. But let me establish something else here, lest you forget that there's another principle that really matters here. And we've already looked at that story in depth in the last video, so we won't go into it anymore. But you see how this pattern is emerging. It's the yin and the yang chasing each other. It's like, here's some good. Oh, but that goes too far. And then the pushback. It's this balance that's developing through the relationship. So We saw with Apollo the eyes and the focus and the willingness to stare at that which is so terrifying that most people would look away. That's a kind of attentiveness. And Marduk has eyes all around his head. However, we're now looking at a very different kind of eyes all over the place. This is from the feminine. This is from Hera. There's a different way that you could be seeing everything all the time. There's the realm of order. That's where Apollo and Marduk are coming from. That's the Logos principle. That's the Jehovah speaking into the chaotic waters. But then there's the chaotic waters. There's the Hera. There's the potentiality, the new life. And that's, of course, represented feminine because, look, it's attractive and interesting and wonderful. And then new life comes out of it. Obviously, you would depict that as feminine. And so Hera, right? We're not saying all women are that or something, but we are saying that men and women emerge because that is what Ovid is saying is behind everything. What's behind everything is this yin yang, this relational thing between these things. And it's all causing the metamorphosis and the changes of new things coming into being. Now, I just got a note from someone in the class, and I don't think you've read ahead in the story. So good instincts. That's coming up real soon. Good instincts on that one. That's a good point. Okay. So what is the feminine way of having 100 eyes, right? It's not so much focus. It's 100 eyes. Well, we said the great-great-grandmother and the great-great-grandfather of this thing, the biggest order and chaos, qua order and qua chaos, right? One is the realm where you think you've got it all figured out, the realm where you understand and you've put everything in order. And the other one is the realm where you have nothing figured out. Neither of these are good and neither of these are bad. They're both good and bad. They're good at times and bad at times. What do we mean? Well, the great-grandmother is Mother Nature, Mother Earth. It's that which gives birth to you. It brings you into being. It sacrifices a lot of blood and sweat and tears and food, and the matter of the world is coming together to make you. Thanks, Mom. Right? That's the relationship Ovid is telling us we have with the cosmos. That's part of the relationship. Also, it breastfeeds you. You don't even understand sustenance. You just aren't happy, and yet it's giving you what you need. It's when the trees are fruiting and that you didn't plant them, you didn't cultivate them, you didn't provide any order. It's just look around. There's stuff to eat. Isn't that great? That's one aspect of the great feminine principle of that which you don't understand. You don't understand anything, but here it is. Isn't it a paradise? Isn't it so beautiful? Well, it's not a paradise. It's half a paradise. Because the other half of the world you don't understand is, I ate this and now I'm sick and dying and there's nothing I can do about it. Well, you're in my world. You're in the chaos world. That happens. The wolf comes. It needs to eat too. And you're in the world where you don't understand it. You're not in control. So it's the place out from which all the dragons come. The other character is not good or bad either. He's good sometimes and bad sometimes. What's really good, what's exceedingly good, is the proper balanced dance between the two. The other thing is that which thinks it has it all figured out. It's culture. And of course, it's depicted paternalistically. It's the thing that says you're not what you need to be, but I know what you are, and you should be this, and go to school and get a job and do this, and here's the rules, and this is what you are. I know what you are. You're this. You're not more complicated than that. You're this. I understand everything. And so it's good because it gives us walls. The walls don't keep out the snakes, but they keep out the wolves. They keep out the dragons. They slay the dragons. It's pushing back against the chaos. It's inventing science like Apollo does, and medicine, and Supreme Court type level judicial systems, and highly sophisticated imperial balances of power that are not at war, but that are keeping things stable, and slaying of dragons and killing of predators. That's a lot of good. Oh, that's a lot better than just hanging out in the woods being like, well, it's raining on me now. Oh, hey, I've got a reason to be happy now because I found some fruit or something to have sex with, or, like whatever. Like, I'm trying to think in the mind of like a chimpanzee, like, oh, now we're doing this. Oh, something's attacking me. Oh, there's a snake, right? That's the world of chaos. It's sometimes good, sometimes bad. You're not in control. One of the good things about the great-great-grandfather is that he's culture, he's structure, he's order, he's figuring things out. What's bad about him? He eats his kids if they don't fall in line. He thinks he knows everything. Obviously. And obviously that's depicted as masculine. Why wouldn't it be? Right? So he's the one that says, no, I'm cognitively blind to anything that doesn't fit my model because the world with which I'm interacting is the world I comprehend. By definition, that's what it means to be in my space, is to be in the place where you understand. But you're blind to the fact that you don't understand everything. And there's change, metamorphosis, things change. So that principle is never always right. It's always ossifying. It's always, I used to be correct, but now we need something new to take this thing further. It's a continual dance between these opposite principles. That is the story of being. That is being itself, if you understand being as a story, which is the way it was understood by the mythopoetics and the way it was depicted for us. And perhaps that's the deepest way it can be understood. I think that might be the case. And that's, in any case, what we're going to adopt as we try to get meaning out of this story. So why are we going into that? Well, what we're saying is, okay, we understand what the I is in that masculine realm, in that order realm, in that we've got it figured out, we're slaying the dragons realm. What are the eyes in the chaos realm? They're a different kind of eye. The 100 eyes, that's when you turn off all the lights and you stick your hand through the doorway into a room that's completely pitch black. You stick your hand in there, and what happens? Your mind imagines the things that might be about to get you. There's nothing there, perhaps, but you're seeing dragons and snakes and serial killers with machetes, and it's all just sort of popping into your imagination because you've put your hand into a place where you don't know what's going on and the lights are off. You've got no vision, so now you have 100 types of vision, right? You're seeing everything could be anywhere, right? So it's the anxiety, right? Hera has a lot of jealousy and anxiety. So why is she manifesting negative chaotic principles, negative, femininely depicted chaotic principles? Because her husband is failing in his masculine principles, right? These are going together. These are both telling us this is one thing. The one thing was Zeus liking Io too much and neglecting his wife. That's the story. So how does that play out to the great-grandfather? How does that play out to the great-grandmother? How does it play out to Zeus? And how does it play out with Hera? It's elements of insecurity and unhealthiness that are being manifest. And now that we understand that we don't have to think of the gods as perfect, they're in a process of becoming, just like everything is. We're in a process of becoming, culture's in a process of becoming, civilization is becoming, nature is becoming, new things are evolving, the world is changing. The world is change. If you want to sum up the title, this is to explain everything, and the title is change. Change. That's true of the whole cosmos. The divine is one half of the cosmos. It's that relationship of yin and yang chasing each other. It's all defined as change. Well, to change means things can't be where they're going to be later. Things are developing. So now, I mean, I swear, I've never been able to comprehend this. This one thing I really keep stressing because I've never been able to understand the story because I was never able to understand this. But if you look at all the videos I've seen online of people telling these stories, nobody understands this. Nobody understands. I'm not saying this is the only place you can get this idea, but I couldn't find anybody explaining this. I had to really beat my head against it before finally it was like, oh my God, that's so obvious. The cosmos, which is divine, it's nature, it's culture, it's people, it's everything. It's the cosmos is everything. That is, to Ovid, change, changedness, changing, okay? Including the divine. All right. So Hera has a servant that says, watch out, it's all around, look everywhere. It's like a paranoid schizophrenic attitude. That's a subpersonality of the great chaotic principle. It's Mother Nature, it's flowering trees, it's also this. It's what's around every corner, okay? Things aren't good for Hera. Things aren't good because of Zeus. Things aren't good because of Zeus. That's a phrase. That's a thing you can't say in our post-Cartesian understanding of the mythopoetic Christian, Judeo-Christian tradition. Things aren't good because God hasn't yet decided or evolved or figured out or negotiated with or been wrestled with properly. But that's what the old stories were saying, even in that tradition. So we're going to use that for here. Okay. So Argus is in charge. He's a guard. He's watching this fish. Well, imagine being a woman who's a queen, who's afraid of the insecurity because your husband's looking at all the 22-year-old girls. There's a lot of anxiety there. There's a lot of tyranny. There's a lot of uncomfortableness. There's a let's watch all the time and let's keep these girls in line. And you know, the shame and the scolding of look how immodestly you're dressed, or let's cut off your clit because that's what good girls do. And we'll circumcise you. And I'm talking about the Islamic tradition or Arabic. And some of these cultures in this area probably similar or may have been similar. In any case, that all of that hell is being created by, it's bad for Io and she's sort of done nothing wrong, right? But she's going to evolve and change and grow in this story. And she has a very good ending, which is awesome. Okay. So it's the paranoia of how do I keep this the way it needs to be when my husband's a jackass who keeps, looking at all the hot young ass all everywhere. That's Hera's hell. And she's making a hell for Io. Okay. Tied to a tree at night, right? Curfew. And well, we better know where you are at night. That's the first thing. And throughout the day, we're always paying attention. Women have better peripheral vision than men do, right? Obviously, and for good reason, and thank God. But, they have better color perception as well. They can see subtle color changes that men typically can't see as well. Well, maybe they're detecting when the fruit is really ripe or something, and the men are out trying to hunt, and so they're focusing, their vision is evolving slightly differently. These are different virtues and different capacities and different things because they're different principles. They're the two principles, right? Okay. That make up the cosmos, the yin and the yang. All right. So we better know where you are at night. That's the first thing. And we're watching you all the time during the day. And women also, not only do they have better peripheral vision, we're not trying to, I'm not going to apologize for generalizing. Generalizing is a principle of logic. It's a thought process. I don't know where it became a fucking crime to generalize, but it's another word for generalizing is thinking. And when you generalize, you're generalizing. So you say generally, and that means not always, right? If somebody says, well, men tend to enjoy watching sports more than women do. And if you say that today, some idiot goes, that's not always the case, I know a woman who's really into sports. I personally, myself, I'm talking in my own voice now, I have a hard time watching sports. It's one of the tests of manhood that I've kind of consistently failed at. I've gotten into understanding tennis a little bit. I can watch a tennis match and enjoy it. I'd rather watch it live or whatever, but there's a few sports because I can comprehend them a bit that I can watch, but I never seek them out. In any case, that's not a disproof of a general principle. Generally, men like to watch sports more than women do, and there's lots of biological reasons for that and everything. It doesn't matter. The men they're watching are doing the thing that they're trying to be good at, hitting a target, that type of thing. Anyway, so generally, what was I going to say that was generally? And then I had to do that because we're living in such an insane world where you can't even think without people accusing you of doing something vicious. Tied to a tree at night, always watch during the day. Okay, so in general, it seems to me that women are more highly attuned to subtle facial giveaways and cultural things and like, oh, look, his foot's a little bit closer to her foot than normally it would be. I think maybe they're communicating with each other and they're not touching each other right now, but look how close even young girls, I've seen young girls do it. It would be like, look, like I've seen a young girl of like 4 or 6 see an adult man and an adult woman sitting near each other, but he and she both had their feet out and their feet weren't touching each other, but they were much closer than normally they would be. And the young girl was like, oh, look, you like her. I was like blown away. I was like, wow. Yeah, that's true. And maybe men notice it. That one might have been obvious or something, but it seems like women have an attention to watchfulness during the day that is a different kind of attention than men have, right? The masculine principle, again, this doesn't have to be true for all people. We're generalizing. Generalizing means in general. It doesn't mean all men and all women, but the Apollo vision, the Marduk vision, is piercingly, willfully looking at the thing that would try to make you afraid to look at it. And this anxious Hera, this feminine vision is like, I'm paying attention to everything. All right. We've set up some rules. You're tied up at night, but also we got 100 eyes watching you during the day and we're picking up on every subtle thing. Well, that's how, this is a poetic depiction. It's pretty obvious what's happening here. Her life is hell. Hera's life is hell. And she's making Io's life hell, the younger feminine nymph's life hell because of it. And again, the problems are all coming from Zeus and Hera and their relationship. It's very interesting. All right. She figures out her situation slowly. So Io tries talking and realizes that she can't talk, and she's starting to realize she's not her. So she didn't even know until she eventually goes to the land of her rivers. That's her paternal brooks. Remember, the story starts out with the mist of the rivers, the strong river. It's like there's a proper paternal principle in this story, and it's not from Zeus. Now, she goes back to those rivers as a cow. She's allowed to sort of walk around during the day, and she sees her reflection, and she's like, oh my God, I've been turned into a cow. So she figures it out. It's kind of like a fall from grace, but it's not because she did anything wrong. This is really that's an interesting dynamic. I don't want to do any more rants. Let's keep reading. So this is, again, the children's version. She realizes she has no speech. She sees her image changed from valued beauty to bovineness, but she was very beautiful still as a cow. I don't know why I wrote it that way. Unrecognized by her father. So her father doesn't recognize her. Now, we're going to tell a short story here. This is the right moment to do it. So let's do it now. Everybody's seen The Little Mermaid. There's a father, lovingly caring, protecting, strong, a paternalistic environment, a king who's providing and loving his daughter. But there's this feminine growing principle that's emerging, this character in that thing that isn't quite comfortable, that says, no, you haven't figured out who I'm supposed to be. I know you think you know everything, but you marry this person and everything works out. It's like, that's not how this works. And I've got my own thing to express, and it might be new and it might cause changes in the world. That's metamorphosis, right? So that story is very tied into these archetypes. However, the original Little Mermaid story is not the Disney version. And the Disney version might be more in tune with this ancient archetype than the original one, or they both might be sort of telling two different stories. One story, but emphasizing two different versions of a story or other stories we could get from these archetypes. So I'm going to tell the scarier version of the story really quickly. Mermaid has a magical body, right? That's what a mermaid is. She can swim through the chaotic, stormy ocean. The prince on the ship is, it's like, I've got it figured out. I've got a structure. Well, the freaking chaos is going to make hell out of that, right? So you sail your ship and things are coming at you and you don't really have them figured out and you haven't incorporated them. So maybe your ship's going to sink. And in this case, the prince didn't have quite enough figured out and his ship did sink and he's going to drown. He's been thrown into the chaos of the ocean and he's going to die. But there's this creature with a magical body. And that magical body allows her to swim through all the chaos like it's nothing. I'm wondering if I have to spell out what I'm saying right now or if it's really obvious. In any case, it might become more obvious when she rescues the prince. She finds this prince falling in the water. He's going to drown, but she's not in danger. So she just takes him to the shore. She spends the night with him. It's a magical, wonderful night. She saves his life when he's in this chaotic mess because to her, there is no chaotic mess. Everything's just whatever. I'm swimming. I don't see what the problem is. Well, she decides she wants to have the prince for real. This is the female version of a Peter Pan story. Remember, Peter Pan never gets Wendy, right? So the Little Mermaid decides she wants to be a woman. She doesn't want to be this thing that just sails through any storm, and because her magical body allows her to, she can just sort of be with a prince one night and go somewhere else and go see somebody else. She's just anywhere she wants to be. I'm going to spell it out a little bit more, even though it's probably overly obvious. Algorithms on YouTube. I watch a lot of YouTube, and I've been getting these algorithms that are showing me videos of, people sharing information that they have. And I don't know if I want to share this. I'll share it in a more anonymous sort of way. I won't go into the details I was going to go into. Some of these people are giving a lot of information, interesting information. Oh, if you go stay at a hotel, or if you stay at a restaurant, and I work there, and here's a little video about how things work. And I had been watching these because they were being recommended by the algorithm. And one of these people, I thought, oh, that's really cool. And she's kind of attractive, and I kind of like this person. And then she started doing more stuff that was a little seedier. And just yesterday, I realized, oh, she has an OnlyFans account. And basically, I looked up how many subscribers she has. She makes like $5 million a month by having sex with all sorts of people all the time in all sorts of settings and video recording it. I didn't pay for that. I didn't watch those videos to tell you that. It's evident from what she's doing. And so at first I'm like, oh, this is cool. I'm learning information. These videos are suggested randomly to me. And then I had to do a lot of research, because I'm not good at tech, to just block those videos so that they never show up to me again, because it was so heartbreaking I'm not trying to be a Puritan, and I'm not trying to be an asshole, but it's so depressing. This person talked about her relationship with her boyfriend, who's a religious person. And but then I realized, oh, so she has a relationship with this guy, but she's fucking all these other people all the time. And I just thought, it's a Little Mermaid. She magically can go anywhere she wants because her body allows her to for now. It's not going to last very long. I'm not saying that to be mean, but you might want to get some wisdom here, because the story is here to warn you about this. Because what happens to the Little Mermaid is, she sleeps with a prince one night, and she does this, and she swims. It's like all the chaos doesn't affect me, but you're wreaking a lot of havoc, actually. And what happens is the Little Mermaid makes a deal with the witch to become human, but she loses her voice. So that's interesting, because she loses her ability to say what would authentically be her. And that might go along. I'm not trying to pick on anybody specifically, but that might go along well with these influencer types, right? Are you really saying anything you really think, or have you become the voice that the algorithm told you to be? And what if you lose your ability to have an authentic voice anymore? That's a hellish place you don't want to get to, but that's what the stories are saying you get to in that way. I'm not trying to be mean to anybody here, but these stories are warnings. Now, what happens at the end of the original Little Mermaid story is that she fails to convince the prince, and she dissolves into sea foam. Okay? What happens in the Disney version is more like what happens in Ovid. Okay? What happens in Ovid is not that. Because Io isn't causing any of this trouble. She's gorgeous, she's kind, she's wise, she's wonderful, and Zeus is the fucking asshole making all of these problems happen, right? So Io actually has a very good end. And so, therefore, I'm not saying that the Little Mermaid story that's more in tune with the real story. But it was worth maybe mentioning that as an aside, because that's the actual story of what happens to the femininity that doesn't respect the chaos and just thinks it can swim through it because its body allows it to. Now, let's get back to the Disney version, which is more in tune with Io, because the Little Mermaid is it's like Pinocchio, trying to become a real boy. She's trying to become a woman of the earth. And she gets into trouble because, hey, she's a hero, and every hero gets into trouble. That's why they're heroes, right? So one of the things that's interesting is that this story and the Little Mermaid story, all of these archetypes are telling us, okay, to get a feminine hero who can go and deal with monstrous things in the world and get to an awesome end, the beginning is she had a good father. Zeus is not a good father. But Io's father, her actual father, is protective and providing and strong, and like she comes from a very good place in her upbringing, and there is a good father in the story, but it's not the heavenly father, right? He's not the heavenly father. That's not a right name for Zeus. Okay, it's these stories that might get us to something like that, but so far he's not that. But there is a good father in this story, and so it starts with, it seems like the stories are saying for a woman to be able to, for a woman to to be empowered to basically stare down bullshit masculinity, she has to have an early relationship with proper masculinity. And so by having a good relationship with a father says, no, you're precious and I value you and you're strong and courageous and I encourage you to do things. I'm not overprotecting you and I'm not imposing upon you as horrible fathers can do in many different ways, right? No, Io, has a great father. He's provided a magic forest and there's a mist that's just sort of the mist of her paternal brook is everywhere in the air that she grows up in, and she's beautiful and she's protected and she's wise and she's intelligent and she's kind, and she's the badass woman you would want your daughter to become, or if you're a young man that you would want to marry or something like that. She's awesome. There's a reason Zeus falls for her, maybe because he's lustful and she's also just beautiful, but she's the cat's tits. Okay. That's the first thing. The second thing is when she goes out and things happen to her in a world, or in this case, more like a snake comes into the garden because she's still in that world, but Zeus comes into it and pretends to be something else so that he can invade it. So either when the feminine does go out to explore and have adventures, or what typically happens with the feminine is adventures are coming, right? There's going to be the wrong guy and maybe the right guy, and you're going to try to figure out who is, but there's going to be a hell of a lot of wrong guys that are going to come and say, hey, your story should be wedded to my story. And, 99% of them need to be told to fuck off, and you kind of don't have the ability to do that unless you come from a father that properly told you what your value really was in the way he related to you. And so she's living in that place and developing, and she's not furniture, right? She's not like, oh, there's a beautiful woman, but she keeps her fucking mouth shut. Right? That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about a tyrannical father where it's like, you be pretty face and quiet. She's wise. She's kind. She does things that make life better for everyone around her. She's a force to be reckoned with. It's like the father's sort of taken a back seat at this point. There's this mist of what he's made possible in the realm, but she's the one dancing in the woods and she's the one doing all the wood nymph things that she does. So it's in that environment that the devil shows up, but the devil is Zeus, right? There's this crazy, no, I shouldn't say crazy. There's this long and old debate in Christianity and the Judeo-Christian tradition of how to understand the relationship between God and the devil. Did God create everything and so he made the devil? Is the devil the dark side of God? Is the devil equal to God in power and he's the opposite principle, right? There's all sorts of different ways that people are trying to work it out. What we're understanding is that probably to read Genesis, to read the ancient mythopoetic texts, to read things like Ovid, and to read Ovid specifically, which is what we're doing, is to say everything is a yin and a yang and a yang and a yin. The bad and the good, whatever the character is, it's the relationship between those things. And so the snake that comes into that garden is Zeus. Well, listen, lots of beautiful wood nymphs have lots of different characters to deal with. Io's the one who's going to deal with Zeus. She's that great, right? She's great enough that things are going to metamorphose and change into a better world, just like they did with Daphne and Apollo, because of her relationship with Zeus. That doesn't mean it's nice. It's not a nice relationship. He's a liar. He's a date rapist. He's a sneak. He's a coward. That's Zeus. Zeus is bringing all of that to this more divine, more perfect feminine principle that is really representative of what our great, 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 great grandmother was when she was helping to make the world be more like it is today as she emerged out of the woods in that. That's what the story's about. Now, the Little Mermaid in Disney version and Io in this story, when the trouble comes, they have the resource of going back to their father. That's metaphorical, maybe. Well, the whole thing's metaphorical. It's all narrative. But the idea is the father that's a good father for the daughter isn't just helping her when he's with her, right? She has something to go back to in her mind to say, wait a minute now, let me talk to the right way of being masculine in relationship to me. That thing never tried to enslave me. It didn't try to impose. It didn't try to force itself on me. It wasn't neglectful of me and acted like I didn't matter. It valued me and cherished me. That's how masculinity should be treating me. This Zeus fucker ain't acting like that, right? And now I'm in trouble. Things are happening to my body. I'm being transformed. I can't speak. Things aren't good for me. And remember, this is such an archetypal story because Io did none of it. Like Io didn't ask for any of this. Zeus in action is so pathetic in contrast with the expectations of just the one with gilded armor that is very different. Yeah, I mean, so I want to stress that what I'm trying to do is not paint Zeus as the evil bad guy. He's very bad in this story. He's the bad guy of this story, right? Apollo was the good guy of the Python story, and you couldn't be any better than the good guy that Apollo was. Apollo was the bad guy of the Daphne story, and you couldn't get any worse than Apollo was as the bad guy of that story, right? So what I'm trying to say is we need to get rid of is this a good guy or a bad guy? To understand the stories, we have to simply say, oh, he's a guy. He exists. He's out there. Part of him is in here. He's a way of being, and I need to be aware of what he's good at and what he's bad at. He maybe needs to evolve and develop, and the version of him in me maybe needs to learn some tough lessons so that he can become more like this than like this. In our static understanding of a post-Cartesian Christian perspective, Yahweh is and ever was and always is the same. That's not Zeus. Zeus is growing. He's maturing. He's changing. He's fucking up. He's making mistakes. He's having punishments. Zeus is in the cosmos. And for Zeus to be in the cosmos is just like for us to be in the cosmos. Everything is a process of becoming. That's why it's called change. Metamorphosis, the changing of forms, evolution, it's change. Everything is at its base change. So Zeus is the bad guy of this story, but we're not saying, so the point of the story is to say he's always been bad. No, he's the king of the gods. We would be in hell if he wasn't on the throne. If any of the other gods were on the throne, you'd be in hell. If Venus was on the throne and you were controlled by lust constantly, you'd be in hell. Zeus has lust, but he's not just lust. That's not the principle he is. If Mars was on the throne, you'd be in hell. If Phaeton was on the throne, you'd be in hell. And before Zeus and this generation of gods took over, it was hell. All there was the principle of power domination, and there was nothing about harmonious dancing and figuring out the proper place and relationship for the grander good. That's what Zeus represents, okay? So I like your comment, and I'm addressing it by saying, yeah, Zeus is the bad guy in this story, and it's the same Zeus who's like the ultimate good guy of the story so far. So how do we make sense of that? We abandon our post-Cartesian perspective that things are simply one thing and always that thing. Clue is in the title. Nothing is one thing and always that thing. Everything is different in a new environment. Change and metamorphosis, which means change and becoming, is what it means to be. If we wanted to approximate a propositional philosophical thesis out of the book, that's what we would say. Everything is change at its most fundamental nature. Okay? Now, of course, that can't really be all the book means because we can't reduce something like this to just a proposition. But it means something like that, or at least that much. We become wiser by figuring out the tangle of nuances of character that lead us to interpretations. Yeah, so that's it. That's Now, in ethics and in philosophy and in science and in maybe different mythopoetic stories, maybe there might, morality tales, there's other ways of thinking. But in this mythopoetic way of thinking, hey, you exist. Welcome to planet Earth. You're a person. You're a character. Let me introduce you to this character over here. Oh, here's Cupid. He flies higher than that. Cupid flies higher than Zeus, by the way, right? So there's principles that do exist on a higher realm than Zeus. Zeus's thunderbolt has been surrendered to Cupid, right? So in a sense, Zeus is rightly the order giver to the pantheon that puts everybody where they need to be because he has the vision for the greater good of it all, right? That's the good he brings. He's a yin and a yang, though. He's not a good thing. He's not all good. He's not omnibenevolent, right? He is a guy, okay? Your friend is good at one thing and not good at another. Good for something and not good for something else. Really awesome friends with your other friend, but hates your other friend, right? That's relational. And to the mythopoetics, to Ovid, and to understand it, we have to understand it as everything is relational. Okay, I relate to Zeus. I relate to Venus. I relate to Mars. I relate to Cupid. I relate to Apollo. And as I relate to them, they change me. And as I relate to them, I change them. Io, our great-great-great-grandmother, beautiful, comes to planet Earth, lives in Earth, born as a nymph in the woods, but it's like a demigod, a founding foremother. She changes the dynamics and the relationships and between Zeus and Hera, between the members of the pantheons. Their relationships evolve and go through turmoil because she's also a personal force in the world. And she's clearly the good guy in this story. It's quite a pattern that's been established now. Daphne and now Io. It's naked girls in the woods, these wood nymphs, these founding mothers of our species that are wrestling with tyrannical or lustful or problematic masculine elements, right? Because remember, the masculine version of the god represents culture. So it's a way of saying, yeah, feminists think that they all started in the 1970s and that like every other woman was a worthless slave. Hello, wake up. You are not showing enough respect to your mothers, okay? They had to live with earthquakes and torture. I mean, the men did too. Everybody's life was way worse back then. But your mothers, you're nothing compared to them. Show some goddamn fucking respect, okay? We went from poop-throwing apes. Chimpanzees are our closest cousins. Humans have sexual selection. Females do most of the selecting. The only time that principle is violated, it's considered by all of us rightly as basically the worst crime there is, maybe worse than murder, okay? Rape is the only alternative to women decide who gets to fuck when and where. That's how we go. In chimpanzees, that ain't how it is. Okay, so our common ancestor with the chimpanzee didn't have either of those principles or only had one of them. Your mothers wrestled with God and culture and nature, which is what we're talking about, and turned our species, helped it to evolve into something where women play the selective role of saying, you're not reproducing, another copy of you might be okay. I'm into that, right? How did that happen? You think that just happened accidentally? Ovid is telling you the way that happened was Daphne. The way that happened was Io, and we live in a different world now than we used to live in. But Ovid's trying to tell us the world we're living in now, here's how it changed. There was a time, so chimpanzees, they live in a world where no female chimpanzees resist males. I'm giving an overly simplified version of this, right? Chimpanzee culture is more complicated than this probably, right? But essentially, the sexual selection plays down to the role of the stronger apes chase away the weaker apes, And then they get to fuck when the women are desirous of being fucked. And that releases hormones that makes them all horny. And that's when it's time to reproduce, right? So, the masculine and the feminine are playing a game, but it's, the female chimps aren't really being selective, except that there is something in common. So our common ancestor had something in common, because the female chimps it's like they've said, okay, I have to surrender to this because he's the big chimp. He can shake trees and kill other male chimps. He could certainly kill me. So whatever, let's go along with it. But it doesn't mean I have to have his baby. And at night when he's sleeping, I might sneak away to go be with somebody else. So that sort of thing happens in chimpanzee culture, is complicated. And the feminine principle wasn't stupid even when we were apes of common ancestor between us and chimps. But the human story has evolved to be very sophisticated. And the story is telling us the reason we're much more sophisticated now, the reason we have armies of men who arrest and imprison and beat up men who dare to use physical violence against women, is that there were some heroes in the past. Get to know Daphne. Here, I'd like to introduce you to Io. She was the great-grandmother who said, okay, we got earthquakes and disease and famine and dragons, and this guy over here slaying the dragons. That's pretty good. Oh, good. Daphne taught him a lesson that he can't just demand anything he wants from us now, even though he did something pretty great. It seems like culture itself, God, Zeus, is saying, we're going to do whatever. Right? It's like Apollo tried forceful rape, and that didn't work. But now Zeus is trying sneaky date rape. It's like, well, how do I know if this guy is really who he says he is? And he's pretending to be a shepherd. Is he really a shepherd? Right. So now Io is saying, okay, I'll deal with the fact that men want us so badly that they'll say anything to get to us. And so that's still a problem today. But the solution to that problem is not a proposition. It's not a political campaign. The solution to that problem, her name is Io. She's a person. Just like everything else in the mytho-poetic perspective is a personality. The solution to chaos that needs to be slain is not a proposition. His name's Apollo. He helps. You get medicine and lots of great things when you do that. The solution to that system itself, thinking now that I've made everything better, I get whatever I want, that's Daphne. She's an even better hero. She's a Christ-like hero. She's a Socratic hero. She says, I'll die to tell you to go fuck yourself. And I'll establish that principle. Thank you very little. Okay? That's who it is. Get to know her. There might be a bit of her in you, right? That's the story, is saying get to know this type of person. So I thought we were going to go through hundreds of slides and read the entire story. We haven't even gotten through half the kids' version yet. I feel like we can't do this forever. So, I mean, I could do this forever and we could just say, well, pause the video whenever you want. But now might be a good time for a break, because we've barely gotten into the story. I mean, none of this is where the story concludes. There's a lot that has to happen still. We haven't even done the real version yet. Maybe let's push through Io and Jove, the kids version. So here's one of the things that's really amazing about Io. We talked about her great past and how great she was as a character. Well, when you think of great writers, you should think of Io. There's something of the scribbler in her. She's lost the ability to speak. It's like culture is silencing her right to even protest the horrible situation that the divine, that the absolute version of masculine culture is trying to impose upon her. And she's budding out of the ground like a flower, saying, no, I'm going to manifest myself and you can't crush me. There's part of my character. You need to respect it more. And what's great about Io is that she's a writer, right? Daphne was a hippie in the woods. She was an awesome character, but she was a different character than Io. Otherwise, it would just be, oh, here's the next thing that happened to Daphne, or here's the first thing that happened to her, or whatever. No, it's a different character. She's a different person. And she has to, she is making manifest in the world a feminine strength that says, okay, yeah, there's a lot of guys around. We dealt with the whole brutality thing. Whenever that comes up, we got Daphne, in other words, what Daphne does is say the powerful masculine force of law should be directed against the masculine element that would be tyrannical. That's the pulling back of the reins, right? So she solved the problem. Make rape against the law. That's Daphne's story. That's how that came to be. That's why this is like telling us the common law tradition of our relationship to the gods and to culture and how it all evolved. Well, that's what Daphne established. Io is establishing something against date rape. She's establishing something against, okay, how can femininity manifest the beauty and the goodness that it has to bring into the world when the guys are so fucking horny, they're willing to say anything and lie and pretend to be something they're not. And Zeus represents masculinity, a culture, right? The culture itself is not ordered properly for me to be established as a thing. She's going to be established. Just like Daphne was, she's going to be established as a really important thing by the end of the story. And it's not because she dies like Daphne did. She's a different character and a different hero. But what were we saying? So one of the things about Io that's different from Daphne is she's very intellectual. There's very much a Scheherazade element to her, where it's like she's wise, she's kind and wise, and she writes in the ground her name so that she can communicate with her father. And you think, okay, she wrote one word. You're making a big deal about writing one word. I had a friend call me up the other day. We were talking about, he had this technical problem. How do I get my phone to stop sending things to voicemail? And I help him with, we try to solve technical problems together sometimes. And it turns out that apparently on some phones you can't turn voicemail off. You have to actually call your provider and ask them to turn it off, and some crazy thing like that. Tech is really annoying to me in more ways than a few. But while we're working on that, I said to him, he's a very smart person. This is a really much smarter and more disciplined mind than mine. Okay, he's very, very intelligent person. But he's like trying to solve this problem. He's very rational and intellectual, so he never acts irritated or upset. But how many hours are we going to spend? I'm getting upset trying to help him. So I'm like, how many hours do we have to spend to solve a simple problem? So when we're at the end of it, I just said to him, I was like, well, what you could do is this. You could just go in and leave a voicemail message that says, hey, the machine's about to ask you to leave a message, but I want you to know that I can't check these messages, and I never do check them. I haven't been able to figure out how to turn it off, but if you leave me a message, I won't get it. So it would be better to text or call back again later sometime. And it's like, okay, fine. That's a fine solution. It's pretty obvious. But he acted like, oh my God, that's genius, right? Sometimes very simple ideas. I'm not trying to say that idea was so genius, by the way. What I'm trying to say is it's a very simple idea, but no idea is really simple in the sense that, that idea is simple. I'm not trying to act like that was genius, by the way. But what I'm trying to say is it's weird how inspiration comes and how the world seems so impossible until an obvious solution presents itself, right? And so there's something extremely clever about, it's like, imagine you were turned into a cow and you couldn't talk anymore. You knew who you were, but nobody else knew who you were, including your father and all of the parts of your culture that recognized you and valued you your whole life. They don't even see you anymore the way they used to see you. How do you remind them of who you are? How do you remind them so that they can relate to you, so that you can try to get to a better place here, right? That's Io's problem. And it's not her fault. It's not like she sinned and now she has this problem. Zeus sinned, in a sense, and now she has this problem. But she's extremely intellectual and very, very clever. And as a cow, she writes her name in the dust thinking, okay, that's a pattern. It's a very simple pattern, but cows don't write in simple patterns. And my father is wise, and he will see that pattern and go, wait a minute, that's not accidental. So with the smallest amount of writing, she can say, I've been turned into a cow and I have no other way to communicate with you, but this is what's happened to me. Stop weeping that I'm gone. This is me. Let's see what we can do to solve it, right? She said a lot in almost nothing. And there's something very clever and intellectual about her. And we're going to see some other things like that. That might seem like I made too much out of a small thing, but I'm only seeing that because I know the other signs of that are coming later. Okay, we're still on the kids' version. Argus decides to remove her from her father to keep his captive. So now the paranoid, schizophrenic, wild, anxious servant of Hera, who's anxious and annoyed at her asshole husband and their marriage unhealth, he's like, oh, okay, so now dad knows who she is. Maybe he's going to try to rescue her. Let's take her away. So it's still not any better for Io. She didn't just solve her problem that way, but she did remind herself of where she came from, and she reminded where she came from. She made herself manifest to where she came from. She let people know who couldn't see her anymore who she really was and who they remembered her as being. So she's doing quite a lot. She has quite a lot to say, and she's been silenced. But even in that, she has quite a lot to say. She's quite a powerful hero. Okay, so Argus decides to remove her to keep the captive. He's serving Hera. That's what he's got to do. Leads her to a distant patcher and seated himself over her to watch her. Mighty Jove felt bad because it was his fault. Unless you think I'm misinterpreting the story, in the story, Zeus recognizes that he's the source of the problem. Okay, this is the right way to read the story. It's right there in the text, and we can read it that way. Okay, I'm not going to go into it again. It's his fault and his wife's jealousy. It's his fault, and it's his wife's jealousy is his fault too. So it's his fault, and it's, he sees that what's not right about his marriage and the harmony of the family and the household, and therefore probably the court, and therefore the world, because he's Zeus. There's problems in the world because of his insufficiency. It's his fault. Once you get that, that's a massive paradigm shift for us as post-Cartesian Christians. I don't want to go into it again because I've been stressing it so much, but you have to understand Zeus is becoming. Zeus is evolving. All is metamorphosis. If you understand the divine as eternal and settled, you just look at the story and it's like, what the fuck kind of story is this? Are you trying to absolutize rape? Are you trying to absolutize being an asshole? No, Zeus is saying, I repent. I see it's just my fault. I feel bad, but he's still a fucking coward. He doesn't just come clean and fix things. At least he recognizes he's the source of the problem. Zeus might be confident and courageous, but he is not complete in the cardinal virtues because he is lacking in temperance and justice. Yeah, okay. So that's good. That's another voice from our philosophy class and from all of this mythopoetic class. And that's exactly right. And so there's that dialogue between philosophy trying to figure out what the virtues are, but to communicate with the mythopoetic. And yeah, Zeus has flaws. That's all that if we can swallow that and say it's good that he's on the throne, okay? It's right that he's ruling, and he's not perfect. And his imperfections are causing fucking problems for everybody. And those things need to be worked out. Well, if he's not the source of the solution, who is? Your great-grandmother, a young 20-something-year-old female from a worse world where things weren't as good as they are now, made things better by making herself felt in the world. And it's amazing how subtle that can be. With Daphne, it was simply, I will say no to death. With Io, it's, okay, you think you're everything here. I'm still here. I can still let people know who I am, and let's see how this works out, because this ain't right. There's something wrong here, and Jove sees that there's something wrong here, and he sees that it's his fault. So he starts to feel bad, but he's still pretty cowardly. Well, I think what you're saying there, let me read that out loud so people can see it. We're certainly criticizing Zeus. He's the bad guy of the story. But just like when we started reading the story, we don't want to think of him as the Heavenly Father, the perfect, always was and is as he is and was, eternal manifestation of something that can't change, because that's not metamorphosis. We also don't want to turn him into the all bad. He's just, he's a bad guy. We're not trying to put him in either one of those categories. We're trying to do exactly what you said here, which is he's good and bad. He's a guy, right? How many of your friends are perfect? How many of your friends are totally bad? You might think they're perfect, or you might think they're totally bad, but they're not. They're good for some things and bad for others. They're good in certain situations and bad in others. They cause goodness to happen in this area. They cause badness to happen in this area. They're all developing. They're all maturing. They're all metamorphosing, which means evolving. I like metamorphose. We might try to use that word more. Yeah, he's not just look, all the newness that comes into the world is new variety, right? So you said, so he's the source of variety, but he's also the source of variety simply by being the one who understands that as new things are coming into being, sometimes by his relationship with things, but always by the relationship of something to something else, that he has the vision for the heaven that we're aiming at, right? It's like Zeus isn't the guy who's got it all right. Zeus is the captain who knows where the ship needs to go, and the ship is everything. It's us, and we're developing into something else. So he sees what the purpose is. Like Marduk has the vision and pronounces destinies, right? It's that principle. But he's flawed. And the story says he recognizes that he's flawed. So if you're wondering if we're reading it correctly, that's the key to reading it correctly. And it's right in the text. So good. Let's move on. We're still in the kids version. I can't believe this. Okay. Mighty Jove felt bad because it's his fault and the suffering he's caused, and that's causing more suffering. He asks Mercury to find a way to kill the beast and free her. Okay. Now that's interesting. Argus is a kind of very unhealthy anxiety depicted as the servant of the feminine chaotic, right? So it's not that chaos or the world, the thing that's complementary to the Zeus masculine cultural principle is always anxiety, but it certainly has anxiety as a weapon. And maybe it needs to die. Maybe it makes sense that it's there because we're in the realm where we don't understand anything by definition. I don't mean that Hera is stupid, by the way. I mean, in her realm, you're in the realm where it's chaos, where you don't comprehend it. In Zeus's realm, you're in the realm where you think you understand it better than you do, right? That's why it's a pulling back and forth. The marriage is what's healthy. Either one. Zeus alone is a horrible bachelor in a messy house. Hera alone is a horrible bachelorette in a horrible spinster in a messy house with a lot of cats. Okay, right? There's no life there. What the life is in the marriage, and the marriage has a problem, and the problem is caused by Zeus, and Zeus is now aware of it, but he's still pretty cowardly. But things are changing. Metamorphoses. Things are changing as the story goes on. So one of the things that's going to change is that maybe the feminine anxiety needs to be slain. Maybe it's reasonable that it's there. Maybe it seems to serve a purpose, and maybe it's helpful for a while, but it's causing a lot of trouble. He's not blaming his wife. He knows it's his fault, but he's caused an insecure environment for his wife. And so, of course, she has eyes looking at everything as part of her kingdom that's trying to dominate and control and keep everything together. That's not the way forward. That's not going to work. So we first have to get rid of the wrong solution before we can get to the right solution. Something like that, right? It's like, as long as you're, I know a person who likes to use this phrase, and you should notice that when people use a phrase jokingly, I'm not trying to be mean to this person. I won't say who they are, but when a person uses a phrase jokingly, they mean it. People say what they mean. There's a verse in the Bible we used to quote all the time. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaketh. And so there's this joke that's not a joke where someone says, delusion is great so long as you can maintain it. No, it's not. It's hell. It's the sign that you're in hell. It's the sign that things aren't right. And what would be right would be to face the problem, admit the problem, deal with the problem, slay the problem. So maybe Argus is the necessary servant to Hera, but maybe he's only there because Zeus is an asshole making things insecure. And maybe the grandmother femininely depicted principle says, look, when everything's going out of control, let me try my best to keep it in control. And there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of watching and sleeplessness and eyes always open sort of thing. That's what Argus represents. And so to start setting things right, Zeus is like, look, we made a mess here. He's not exactly taking responsibility and saying, let me come clean. Let me confess to my wife. Let me promise not to do it again. Let's see if we can. He's not doing the right thing yet. He's still metamorphosing. This isn't the solution yet. But, maybe he's too egocentric or cowardly to just solve the real problem first. Well, let's deal with the Band-Aid problems first. But those are problems. So that's what happens first. So he says, Mercury, can we find a way to kill this anxiety? Well, Zeus, you could kill the anxiety by being a better husband, but okay, let's see if we can kill the anxiety and free this poor girl that you were, quote unquote, in love with, that you've caused so much trouble to. So Mercury flies and disguises himself as a shepherd again, playing a flute. Argus likes the sound and wants to hear more. He gets lulled to sleep. Essentially, 50 of his eyes are asleep, and then he tells the story. He tells stories and plays the flute so long that he actually gets this beast to go into a really, really deep sleep. It takes a lot of medicinal music to calm that kind of a beast. The beast of anxiety sprung from insecurity. Understandably, rightfully so, because there's still the source of the problem that hasn't been fixed yet. Okay. Lulled into sleep enough to close his 100 eyes, gets his head cut off. Hera loved her servant. She was very attached. Well, monsters that grow inside of you, part of the reason why you never slay them is that they make up so much of you and they're so entangled with what you are to get through the day that you think losing them would be a catastrophe. The catastrophe is that you needed them in the first place, and that might not have been your fault. It might have been some other masculine thing that imposed itself or made things less good than they should have been and wasn't wise enough, and the world needs to evolve into a better place. And that's what we're reading about, it getting to that place originally, so that we can say, oh, that's the echo of that is my personal life story. There's generational curses happening here. We need to find the source and cut it off and get to the root of it and solve the real problem. But in the meantime, we're putting Band-Aids on things, and the Band-Aids might be a lot of drugs or anxiety or constant wakefulness or deals with manipulation to try to control. What? Not because we want to dominate, that's the masculine desire to control, but control because we're terrified and anything can happen if we don't control everything around us all the time through gossip and manipulation and all of that stuff. All of that's happening not because Hera is a bitch, but because Zeus is a son of a bitch. Right? Zeus has caused all of this, and he's still not dealt with the source of the problem yet. But I just want to have a fun time. As long as my wife doesn't find out. No, she's gonna find out. Okay, she's not stupid. And the dominoes fall and the chaos comes. And it's all explicitly Zeus's fault. He's still on the throne. I mean, that's the impossible thing for us to understand. Get that, and you get the main thing out of this story to dive into understanding the rest of these stories. Get that it's Zeus's fault, and it's still right that he's on the throne. We don't have a better guy that understands how it should be. He's just got some growing to do. If you can understand that God has to grow and change like everything else, you understand how to read the story. That's the thing I realized. That was my revelation while I was beating myself in the head with this story going, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense right up until this morning, last night and this morning. That's, I think, the key here. Okay. So one of the other things about anxiety is that it seems like a bottomless pit, like a monstrous thing that just has no end, but you just sort of can't stay in that state forever. It's like it gets exhausted eventually, right? And that's sad that it's sort of the destiny of Argus when it manifests itself because of the shit that was caused by other things and paternalistic curses and all of that, wherever it comes from. And this story is telling us it comes from Zeus, but because in his insufficiencies, but wherever it comes from, when it manifests itself, it seems ineradicable, but it's also the sort of thing that exhausts itself to death, that eventually falls asleep and dies, because you just can't stay there forever. Now, you can stay there for 30 years. You can stay there for 50 years. It can have a massive effect on your health. It's a powerful thing. I mean, Zeus has to think, is there any way we can slay this thing? This is a big deal. And it's causing torture and hell to other younger feminine things that didn't do anything wrong, that are trying to come into being. And it's all, of course, Zeus's fault, which he still hasn't recognized yet. But this thing is monstrous, and Hera's in love with it because at least it's always honest. It's always watching. It's always whatever, right? So Zeus's insufficiency pushes her towards this monster, and he's a servant of hers. And something needs to be fixed, and so she needs her servant to fix it. He's the right one. But that constant watchful wakefulness, that's not sustainable forever. And so the story is saying, yes, it comes into being. You think you depend on it. You need to let it die, and it's going to die. It's going to get exhausted, and it's going to die. You can't stay there forever. But people can stay there for many decades, and it's not good. And nothing good happens when, nothing good happens with Io. Nothing good happens because this thing is happening. Again, it's not Hera's fault. It's not Argus's fault. It's all Zeus's fault. The story is very clear. This is all Zeus's fault. But that doesn't mean the Band-Aid solutions are right. We got to get rid of the Band-Aid solutions before we can get to the real solution. So, so Hera goes from insecurity, anxiety, constant wakefulness. She loved her servant and was living in that delusional world she was trying to maintain, where she could sort of massively control it in a desperate attempt, to real bitterness and anger. She tortures Io explicitly now. It's like, okay, fine. I can't keep everything looking right. I can't keep it. You're tied up at night and we're watching you, so everything's sort of okay and it looks good from the outside. I can't maintain holding on to it that way anymore. Fine, I'm just going to fucking torture you directly. Fuck you, bitch. And so she sends a gadfly to torture poor Io, who's just this baby heifer, right? This sleek, beautiful, healthy cow is now being tortured by a gadfly for years. And there's an interesting thing to the story of Io, because the hero has to sort of leave the security of the village to go to the mountain to slay the dragon and get the gold and bring it back to the village. That's that masculine Apollonian Marduk, King George dragon slaying story. But all the hero stories we're getting that make the world right now, the first two we've gotten are feminine heroes. Daphne's clearly the hero, not just the good guy, but the hero of her story. Io is clearly the hero of this story. And there's a difference in her hero story, right? Daphne is a Socratic, Christ-like. It's a very feminine kind of a hero in a lot of ways. It's the hero that, right? So we've already talked about this in the last one, but let's say it again. The masculine depicted hero, the Apollonian hero, looks at the chaos that might prey on us or be the source of predation and suffering for us, and cuts it into pieces, stares at what's too terrifying to stare at, looks right at it and slays it, and then makes the world better and more habitable because of it, gets the powers of the snake. We talked about that a lot. This other feminine hero is maybe more important because it immediately defeats the first hero and says, look, you're not everything, but it's at least equal to that other hero story. And it says, look, this order that we have now, whatever order we have, it still needs to evolve to something better. It's not perfect and static, and it has all the answers. So I, as a fragile, singular individual, right? By the way, when we say masculine and feminine depictions, we don't mean men aren't supposed to manifest this thing and women are. We're not saying women are not supposed to manifest this thing, but men are. That's not what we're saying. Everybody needs to know these stories. And what the man, Socrates and Christ are both dudes with dicks, and they are Daphne-like heroes. So that's all I'm trying to underline there, is that we're not saying they're masculine and feminine because this is how a woman can be great. This is how a man can be great. No, this is how the individual can be great, depending on if the balance is too far towards order or too far towards chaos. If it's too far towards chaos and you have no idea what's going on, the right thing to do is to look at it. What Hera should have done is said, hey, husband, I see through your bullshit. Okay, I know what you're doing. I'm not fooled by this. And instead of torturing Io, looking at the thing that seems too terrifying. Why is it too terrifying? Because he might say, yeah, I'm kind of tired of you and I don't want you anymore, right? So she's too afraid to look at it. So she doesn't. I'm not trying to pick on her. It's Zeus's fault. But I'm bringing her up because she's a feminine character, and I'm trying to say the Apollonian masculine depicted hero of slaying the chaos and looking at what's most terrifying is what women need to do and what men need to do. It's what we all need to do. And the feminine hero, the typically femininely depicted hero of Io and of Daphne, this is the character that says, okay, look, we're out of the chaos. Now we have too much order. The order thinks it knows everything. And I, as a singular naked individual without a lot of power, without thousands of years of culture on my side, I'm going to look at that cultural system that thinks it knows everything. And I'm going to say there's something here that you're not taking into account. You don't know it all. Here I am. There's surprises. There's things you don't know. In Daphne's case, it's fuck you. Right? In Socrates' case, it's give me the hemlock. I want to drink it. You're all pretending you know more than you do. You don't. I will drink the hemlock. And that hero dies. The Daphne hero dies. The Socratic hero dies. Christ says, I am the truth, and we need to get to somewhere else. You don't really understand it yet. You think you've got it all figured out. The Sanhedrin and the Pharisees. Oh, we are children of Abraham. Saying you're in a club isn't the point. Right? So I'll die to make that point because you're not going to let me prove that you're all nothing and or not nothing, but that you all haven't quite gotten there and there's something you're not taking into account. So they take the death as the punishment and they conquer the world. Laurel wreaths are everywhere. Cathedrals are everywhere. Universities are everywhere. This is because of the Socratic and the Christ and the Daphnic hero. Okay, so Io is a second version of this feminine hero who says, okay, look, things aren't right with the world. And what's not right with the world in this case is not too much chaos. It's the culture isn't respecting what it should be respecting. It's demanding too much. It's manipulating too much. It's not healthy. There's a problem with mom and dad. Okay. And this needs to be fixed. And so the individual who's just a naked baby, who's just a wood nymph dancing in the woods, who's just a singular individual says, okay, this character is here now. This needs to be incorporated. I represent the thing that you're not able to incorporate yet. So you need to adjust, not me. And it's not doing it like tyrannically. It doesn't have any power. It's just this naked wood nymph dancing in the woods who's wise and kind and beautiful and wonderful. And she's like, okay, your marriage is going to get messed up, great king of the gods. And you're going to have to work through that. But that's because of me, because I'm here and you didn't take it into account. You don't know how to deal with it all properly. Okay, so let's see how she does it. So now we're at a place where Hera is no longer using anxiety to try to keep it all looking right when it's not. Now she's just explicitly torturing poor Io. And Io, now, so here's the other thing. It's like, so the masculine hero sort of willfully goes away from the insufficient culture to find the dragon, get the gold, and bring it back and distribute it. Masculinely depicted. Again, remember, it's for everybody. The femininely depicted hero, the one we saw with Daphne is, you walk up to the system, you say you know more, you think you know more than you do, so go ahead and kill me, but I'm going to change everything after that. And I conquered the world by doing that. And I conquered death itself by doing that. With Io, what we have so far is, here I am, just being awesome. She's just like a Joseph character. She's just goodness all around, basically. And even better than Joseph. She's just goodness all around. And, just beautiful, wise, and kind. And Zeus is not, there's problems. Okay. The structure ain't right yet. And now she's at this place where she's so tortured. It's just sad. It gets worse for her that she goes on a journey to try to get away from this gadfly. So she, instead of willfully going away from insufficient culture to find something and bring it back, the culture's insufficient. And so she has to leave it because she's being cast out of it. The culture would be better if it had rightfully, like the culture of the valley and the mist of the paternal brooks of her childhood that she grew up in, that was a more of a heaven than all of Greece is now that Zeus has still not fixed his own problem that he caused, and she's being sent out. Okay, but anyway, she goes out for thousands of miles. She makes it to Egypt eventually, always tortured by this gadfly, always tortured. Zeus promises to never again speak. So finally, look at, sometimes you don't know what you got till it's gone. Zeus is lustful and demanding. He's conniving, he's tricking, he's trying to set it up so he can be with Io, and he's not even presenting himself to her properly. I mean, honestly, he's pretending to be a shepherd. He's doing whatever tricks he thinks he can to get the pussy. I mean, that's what he's doing. So Apollo was like, hey, I got it figured out. He's very stupid and blinded by lust. Zeus is blinded by lust, but not in a stupid way, in a crafty, tricky kind of a way, right? So this is the masculine not properly relating to the feminine thing that we needed to evolve through, that Ovid's saying, well, there were some great women in the past that helped us get to a point. Daphne made us make rape illegal, forceful rape, and now we just use the force of masculine arm to arrest people like that, and that's a great solution to that problem. Well, that's a better world than where we were living before, right? He's telling us how we got to where we are. It's amazing. It's the common law tradition of ancient people without it being written down. Anyway, now Io is saying, okay, look, that's not enough. Okay, knocking me in the head and raping me. Okay, good, Daphne. Thanks for showing that that's not right. I'm glad we're living in a better world. But there's an awful lot of ways to knock me in the head, to pretend you're something other than you are, to lie and cheat and steal and sneak and set things up and poison my drink and do all of this fucking shit. And that's not right either. And that's what Zeus is manifesting here. And it's easy to not like Zeus in this story, right? There's, as much as we've been trying to say who he is, we've not been defending him. Well, what's going to happen if women can't be themselves and manifest the bits of truth and goodness and beauty that they have to bring to the thing? You're going to lose those bits of truth and good and beauty because they're going to fuck off, right? They're going to have to. You're going to drive them away by torturing them. You're not going to have a structure that can have them incorporated in it like she was in the beginning. I can't believe how much we're figuring out. I didn't understand this. I'm so glad we get to talk about this. It's so amazing, but I'm still remembering all these images I haven't shown yet. But the forest and the valley and the rushing river, this is the place where she had a great childhood. But the culture, the legal structure, the system that Zeus is in charge of is not ordered well enough to have such a great gift. And so she has to leave for a foreign land, for a different culture. I mean, how amazing is that? Because we said there's a dialectic between the stories for the one culture and the stories for the other. This part of the story is saying we failed and we're losing valuable things to a different culture because we have failed in keeping them. Right? It's like a self-criticism of the culture. The story isn't saying, oh, our stories are perfect, let's fight to the death, that our gods are the right gods and you have to call them by our names. The stories themselves are saying our gods are making mistakes. And also, if we don't find the right solution, here's what we're going to lose. Because we're going to torture it until it leaves. So she gets to Egypt, and finally Jove does what's right, but he does it too late. Right? It's like you don't get to have Io anymore. There's a level of beauty and wisdom and kindness that you don't get to have in your culture if you wait too long. Oh, this is hard because we're all waiting too long. We're all dealing with delusion and putting off what we ought to do. But the story's telling us, this is rough, but the story's telling us if you wait too long to do what's right, to set right what you made wrong, you're going to lose levels of truth and goodness and beauty that you could have had in your culture. They're just going to fuck off to another place because you're going to torture them away. She doesn't come back. This is a profound warning. This is a shut your mouth and sit back and get punched in the face by the story. So finally, Zeus does what's right. He goes to Hera. He goes, look, we can't keep torturing the world. We can't keep torturing being. This isn't right. I fucked up, okay? I'm not going to talk to Io anymore. I'm not going to go hang out with her. I'm not going to go have long walks with her. She's gone anyway. I'll stop doing that. Can you stop torturing her? Because it's not good for you. It's not good for me. It's not good for the culture that something that didn't deserve any of this is the thing that has all the punishment when really it's just our fault. It's my fault. So I'm going to stop causing the problem do you think you could just stop torturing her? Because it's not good. And remember, Zeus is in charge of seeing what's good for the world and pushing it in the right direction and putting people in the right place where they can go in the right direction. He has that vision, and he's realizing I'm fucking up here, and it's actually costing being itself goodness. And so we want to get to this better place. I got to stop doing what I'm doing. And because that's why this is happening. And so he goes to Hera, and Hera, she's not a bitch, she feels bad for Io. She realizes, like, look, I was young and I'm feminine and you're feminine. It's like, this guy's really the source of the problem. I've been taking it out on you because I felt like I couldn't with him and he wouldn't be honest with me. But if we can get things right, suddenly I'm no longer angry at you, right? It's not, oh, all the other women, they could draw my husband's attention away. I don't have that anxiety anymore. That's gone. But also, I don't feel the need to like be a nasty to you because he's not causing the problem anymore. He's not causing the rift. He says, look, I'm not going to do that anymore. Let's stop. We've caused so much hell on earth. Let's turn this around before it gets so bad we lose everything, right? If you're a king and your kingdom isn't running well, that's when you get deposed, right? Well, Zeus repents. Zeus turns around eventually. It takes him a long time. He's very cowardly. He's very pathetic. It's humorous and ridiculous. But being itself suffers until he finally is like, look, the only real solution here, I can get rid of her anxiety because it'll eventually exhaust itself. But she's just going to be nastier explicitly. Like, it's just getting worse and worse. Let's fix the real problem. Hera, I'm sorry. I won't talk to her anymore. Okay. And he means it. She can tell he means it. He's lying to her a bunch and she sees through his lies. She clearly believes him this time. So she can tell that this is for real. And so she looks at Io and she's like, oh, this poor creature. I've been torturing her. It's not really her fault. And I feel so bad. So she gets changed back into her beautiful form again, but she's not with her father. She's not in Greece. She's not in the valley. She's not in the forest. She's not where she came from. She's in Egypt now. She's far away. The story is that the people saw her so beautiful and so good that they made her their queen, called her Isis, paid her tribute long after her death for hundreds of years. So the temple, that's where Isis came from. She was just a nymph. She was just a demi-human, like a meta-human, or a demigod, a nymph in the woods. And she became this thing that people pay tribute to and seek advice from in Egypt. That's according to this story. Remember, there's a dialectic between the different mythopoetic traditions, between the culture's mythopoetic and philosophical, analytical, propositional traditions, and clearly the story with itself. The story itself is saying, I'm changed too, and things are changing with me, and my head god needs to grow. And also, our culture itself might not be as good as, it might have lost some goodness that another culture rightly respected, right? So Zeus didn't respect Io properly, didn't respect femininity properly, didn't see it as more valuable than, ooh, I want, let me see what tricks I can use to get. Maybe not quite as bad as Apollo in the sense that Apollo was like, you will fuck me, and Zeus is date raping. Pretty fucking bad, you know what I mean? It's like Apollo's he's trying to violently rape. He doesn't even realize it, but that's clearly what he's doing. And Zeus is now date raping. It's just like, what's the proper relationship between order and chaos, between masculine and feminine, between matter and the infinite, between limitlessness and the finite, right? Well, it can't be tyranny of one over the other, right? That's by definition not the yin-yang proper balance chase. And so the stories are telling us one after another, here's where it's imbalanced this way. Python is in charge and everything's chaos. Apollo comes in and brings some balance. Apollo goes over the top and thinks he knows everything and everyone should submit to him because all the chicks like him except for Daphne. And so why shouldn't she like me too? And she's the first one I've ever been in love with and all of this other shit. He's blind and stupid and blinded by lust. And it's like, okay, we got way too much order, way too much. We think we know everything. So Daphne comes in to bring the balance in. Now we have a repeat. We have a new version. It's like, okay, Zeus is in love with being. That's why he's so interested in making it go. He's in love and he's fascinated by the magical forms that are coming into being. He doesn't get to have that post-Cartesian Christian perspective of sort of I'm everything and you need to submit to me, or I get what I want, or it's all me that defines everything. If he's in love with it, he has to really be in love with it, which is to have the proper respect for it. And it is a dance partner, not a slave and not a tyrant, right? So these stories are all about those two things. They're all about change as it happens through change as it happens through relational characterological narrative. And all that change is putting us closer to heaven through finding proper balance between the yin and the yang as they chase each other, between these two incompatible principles that are in love, right? Cupid's the higher principle. So the love thing is what this is about. But the love isn't the yin and the love isn't the yang. It's the chase. It's the line between them. That's where we live. The story says you and I, we live in the place that's properly balanced between the two. And there's always falling off the tightrope one way or falling off the tightrope the other on either side. So I can't believe we did all of that without doing the story with the adult version. And I want to look at the poetry and I want to look at the geology and I want to look at all of this, but I didn't expect to just keep stopping because I've been trying to wrestle with the explanation I gave, the insufficient attempt at explaining the story that I gave just now that we're going to wrap up soon. I'm trying to do that because I didn't understand it even yesterday. I've been staring at these paintings and looking at the poetry and trying to figure it out. And I know I only have maybe 20 to 30% of the story figured out right now, but the kids' version was enough because I was remembering all these other images and things. But we're gonna definitely have to finish this. So let's call this part 1. And then what we'll do in part 2 is we'll do all that geology stuff. Man, I found great things. And geology is metamorphosis, and the supercontinent cycle and the Wilson cycle and the plate tectonics, all of that stuff is actually also the very nature of being. And the earth itself, this story is saying this is what everything is like. It's how men relate to women. It's how culture relates to it's how government relates to citizenship. It's how nations relate to each other. It's every single level of analysis is being. Well, it's also true geographically and geologically. And I thought it would be really fun, since we have so many river gods, to talk into what is a river, what is a mountain, why is a mountain always crumbling into a delta, and the channeling of the water, and where does ocean come from as being born from mountains, and how are mountains caused by ocean spreading, and the whole great cycle of all of that is also being, and what the stories are about. We've been focusing on legal history, we've been focusing on psychological interpretations, but all of the interpretations are what the mythopoetic is trying to say at one and the same time. And so we should find the same truths at every level. And we didn't get to look into any of that this time. So let's call this part 1 of Io and Jove. We've gotten through the story. I thought we were going to very quickly get through the kids' version, and then I was going to try to find all that to explain, but I realized it was all in there. So we'll look at the paintings, we'll look at the art, we'll look at some geology, we'll look at, what else do we have to look at here? Geography as well as geology. I've got some Google Earth stuff that I put together. And we'll look at the poetry and we'll see what else we can get out of it next time. I'm not sure when next time's going to be, but it won't be any later than next Sunday. And it might be sooner than that. So with that, I'm going to end the broadcast and we're going to open it up to the people who are here right now to have a post-show discussion. And we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for joining us.